Today I'm sitting down with Bharat to talk about one of our favorite movies, Catch Me If You Can. We're going to go through the plot, our favorite scenes, best quotes, the amazing production values, and the great performances by Leo, Tom Hanks, and of course Christopher Walken. I'll also give you a glimpse into the real Frank Abagnale and how most of the things in his book never actually happened. And if you'd like to win the Blu-ray of Catch Me If You Can, along with some books about it, make sure to stick around till later in the episode where I'll be telling you how you can enter a sweepstakes to win these prizes for 1 month after this episode comes out. Today we're going to be talking about a movie of crime, deception, chase, adventure, romance, maybe not, starring two of the biggest Hollywood stars at the time and still to this date, directed by one of the greatest directors of all time, again at the time and still. Catch Me If You Can. And I'm going to be delving into this movie with Bharat. I provided you a fairly long list of some of my favorite movies that are all candidates for the top 100, and you picked this one out of many, I hope you agree, good movies. So why did you pick this movie, and tell us a bit about your relationship with it?
Yeah, so when you sent me that 100 list, it inspired me to start making a list of my own. So I'm about 20 deep at the minute, and I'm sure I'll share that with you later. But yeah, Catch Me If You Can stood out because it's one that would absolutely go on my list. But I just think, it stood out because it was something that I've just consistently always considered one of my favourites, and I think it's interesting to talk about why it's your favourite with someone else that's also their favourite, because I'm sure we've probably got similar reasons, but also quite different reasons based on all the research that we might have done or not done equally.
So we're going to do a spoiler-free 5-10 minutes, but I think it's fair to say, as the poster shows, this is a movie about a chase, about two characters, one chasing the other, and I think we can say it's about a con man. So let's start with, do you remember when you first saw this movie, and how often have you seen it? Just to kind of give us an idea of its place in your life.
Yeah, I couldn't say when I first saw it, to be honest. I probably remember watching it repeatedly when it would have like reruns on ITV and like Channel 4 and things like that when I was younger. But I couldn't actually tell you how old I was. I remember being quite young. I'd say maybe 10. Let's just throw that out there. I was born in 94. This came out in 2002. So yeah, probably about right. In terms of how many times, I'd say 10 to 15 is probably fair. Possibly more. I'd say 20 max. But yeah, maybe 15.
I feel 10 is about the threshold that when... Not that it makes something your favorite movie, but if you've done that around our age, and it's probably in like a select group of movies you've seen that.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the good qualities about it is the rewatchability for sure.
Yeah, so I think I'm the same, where I don't think I saw it in the cinema. I was 12 when it came out, and it probably definitely is PG-13 at least. But it feels like the sort of movie, because even though it appeals to our younger souls, it was very much a grown-ups movie with, Oscar-nominated stars as Spielberg. So this is probably squarely in my DVD rental from the DVD store time. So I'm sure probably the first time my parents have heard of it, we watched it. And probably, I kind of think it was something that I rewatched a lot, 13, 14, 15, but then maybe when we grow up and become a bit older, we start appreciating all the nuances of it. So
definitely.
And I think like you, now I'm probably around that 10, 15 range. I don't think I'd seen it in a while, and then last year I watched it and thought, oh yeah, we're definitely doing this on the podcast, and then very much enjoyed this rewatch. But as our viewers may see, if you're joining us on the podcast platforms, thank you. But you can always follow us on YouTube as well to see the full episodes as well as small segments. But what we have here is obviously the Blu-ray, obviously the book, but also a third book called The Greatest Hoax on Earth, Catching the Truth While We Can. I'll take the opportunity to say now that I have read the Catch Me If You Can book, obviously watched the movie a bunch of times, and I've started reading this, but basically, the whole Wikipedia article about Frank Abagnale is based on this book, pretty much every other reference, and it's a very well-sourced book. I'm going to say it from now. I'm not going to spend too much time during the main body of the pod talking about the real story. I'll make a couple of references to the book, because the movie is very much based on the book, but let me just tell you to start with that there is a slight differences between the movie and Catch Me If You Can book. But maybe it's a 10-15% difference, whereas there's about 5% similarity between them and this book. But we're going to keep that for the end. So at the end, we're going to do a completely separate segment. I'm going to give you 10, 12 facts about the movie, and you're going to pick 4 or 5, and I'm going to basically tell you this is what happened in real life, this is how they say in the book, and kind of see the consistency. But I'm not going to keep harping on about that during the podcast. We're going to keep that for later. So make sure to stick around to see that. So now we're going to talk about the movie. The movie was released in 2002 and is based on the 1980s book by Frank Abagnale Jr., the main person at the center of all of this, played by Leonardo DiCaprio. Interestingly, the movie is categorized as biographical, inspired by a true story, but the book is considered semi-biographical, which is a bit of a red flag.
Is that the official? Is that what it appears as on
Yeah.
Wikipedia?
Yeah.
Okay.
On IMDb, biographical movie. Okay. So obviously, like we said, the movie stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks, directed by Steven Spielberg, music by John Williams, absolute all-star cast.
Yeah.
It was a critical and commercial success. It was the 11th highest-grossing movie of 2002, making $352 million on a $52 million budget. It was nominated for 2 Oscars. Did you see what those were?
No, actually.
Do you
Your
want to guess?
research is going to be much deeper than mine.
That's fine. That's what hosts meant to do. Do you want to take a guess?
I'll go best adapted screenplay.
No. So one's okay. I'll give you a clue. One is acting and one is in the production.
One is acting, one's in the production. Okay, I'll go Christopher Walken, best supporting actor.
Yep.
And the production.
So I'm using
best editing.
No, best music.
Okay,
so
which is well deserved.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to guess the? Putting you to work here. Let's put you. Do you want to guess the? Or you might have seen it. That's fine. We won't check the Rotten Tomatoes percentage, both the reviewers and the public. The interesting thing here is always to see what people think in terms of which one was higher or lower.
Yeah. I'll go reviews. I'm going to go high. I'm going to go 93%.
Okay, and the public?
Public, I'll go 79.
So 96 for the critics, so extremely high, and 89 for the public.
Okay.
So
very positive.
Yeah, the reviewers preferred it slightly, but yeah, both extremely high. And IMDb?
I think I do remember that one. 81.
Yeah, 8.1.
I got the 8.1, sorry.
Which are you more IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes? Like, what's your go-to?
IMDb. That's how I kind of record everything that I watch, pretty much. I'll rate it, and then I can just kind of scan back.
Oh yeah, you are one of the people who does actually rate everything on IMDb. You make the world go round.
Yeah. Don't know if it contributes to the overall score, how the algorithm.
No, it does. It absolutely does. So at 8.1, Catch Me If You Can is number 175 on IMDb's top 250 list. I always find it interesting to see what's just above and what's just below. So just above are Raging Bull and Trainspotting, and just in front of Gran Torino and Spider-Man No Way Home. So very eclectic grouping. I did a little bit of a deep dive on the top 250. Do you want to guess how many movies Spielberg has in the top 250?
Oh, that's a good one. Right.
This is not the quiz part of the way. This is just a warm-up.
Right. So we know Catch Me If You Can's in there. That's one. Jurassic Park, the first, has got to be in there. Schindler's List has got to be in there. I don't think Jaws will be in there. I'm going to go with 11.
7?
Okay.
And the surprising, Jaws is in there.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. E.T. is not.
Right.
Which
they should be the other way around, in my opinion. But that's
you try and tell Danny that Jaws should be in the top 250. Tom Hanks has 6, and Leo also has 6. So that tells you everything you need to do. So one of the questions I like to talk about with my guests before we get into the weeds is, who would you recommend this movie to? What mood would someone have to be in for you to be like, you should watch Catch Me If You Can tonight?
Yeah, honestly, sounds like a bit of a cheap answer, but I'd honestly say anyone, and I think the reason for that is because it has a little bit of everything. Like, even though it's not necessarily action heavy in like the super physical stunty CGI sort of sense, I think there's always something happening, and the film moves at a really good continuous pace. So if you're after something that's exciting and is kind of like a good beat after beat after beat in the film or a story, you kind of get that. But equally, if you don't want something that's too demanding and too much going on, I feel like it moves at a smooth pace, where it's smooth and slow enough for you to still enjoy it and understand everything that's going on, and not be like, I didn't see what happened there, or I didn't understand what happened there. So I feel like from a pacing point of view, and that's one of the things I think the film does the best, is how it paces from start to finish.
If anything, it goes a little bit too quick sometimes. But I think you're right. It's something you could sit down and, as we've done, take notes and stuff, or you can just sit back and be like, okay, I get what's going on. He's a con man and stuff. One of the things, I'll mention this later in more detail, but Spielberg referred to it as a dessert movie, just lighthearted, easy to consume. Okay. Everyone sort of likes it, and you're right. Obviously, this isn't going to be everyone's favorite movie, but I can't imagine anyone saying they hate this movie.
No, absolutely.
Unless they've read this book.
Yeah. But it's funny that you say that, though, because I'd say I kind of look at the film on 3 levels a little bit, and you've almost perfectly, by pure coincidence, got the 3 levels here, where you've got the the initial level where you could take everything at face value ultimately. And maybe me watching it as a kid, I did take everything at face value, 100%.
Especially when they tell you it's based on a true story.
Yeah, exactly. And you read about it and you're like, this guy did this thing, and then you just take that as, verbatim, don't you? You just take that as pure fact. So I think that's how I maybe received it initially. And then as I get older and you learn a little bit more about how films are made and that not everything is as it seems in the world, maybe you start to say, oh, okay, they've taken liberties at the story. Maybe this didn't quite happen as they presented it, but they've done that so it makes it a kind of a sharper, neater story, and they packaged it in a certain way. And then as you get even older, and even over the last few years, as certain things have maybe been revealed about the film and this book that I've not actually heard of or read, but I'm sure maybe tells a lot more than I know or realise. I think you maybe then have a different relationship to the film, but I think that's where the film's main strength is that you don't have a bad relationship with the film. The film itself still holds up and you can still enjoy it, and it doesn't matter whether X, Y and Z actually happened. You can still just enjoy it for how it was made and how it was produced, and almost the fact that you're maybe being a little bit conned.
Absolutely. I mean, there's something once you really get into the real life, there's something very meta about the fact that you're watching a movie based on a con man, and then the whole thing might actually be a con. Made the point, you were getting really ahead of ourselves here, but something you said that I want to make sure we talk about kind of at the end in the recap is how important is it for a movie like this that it is based on a true story? And basically, does it take away from the fact that it's not? And that, again, that is something we'll talk about at the end. Yeah, so I have it, like we said, fun, lighthearted, and it just showcases great movie craft. I don't think it's, there are certain movies that are, Oscar bait and stuff that are not accessible to people, but this is a movie with great actors, great directing, great story, great costumes, great music, great everything. But anyone, a child could watch this and have a good time. Obviously, they would miss a lot of it. And in terms of who would watch it, I like to think of kind of the two extremes are, it's something, would you go on a first date and see at the cinema? And you absolutely would, because, men and women would both enjoy it. It's something you could talk about at dinner afterwards. There's so much to talk about. But then it's also something like, if you were just coming over and have pizzas, would we put this on for the 15th time? Absolutely. So, yeah, I think you're right that any mood, any person. So, yeah, if you guys haven't watched Catch Me If You Can, you absolutely should. And if you haven't watched it in a while, listen to this podcast and then watch it again. And with that, we're going to cross the spoiler line. So up until now, we've tried our best to try and keep the details at bay, but from now on we're going to talk about everything. We might talk about the end in a minute from now. We're going to spoil everything, so if you want to have an experience, whether you haven't seen it or you haven't seen it in a while, and watch it with any sort of fresh eyes, stop, pause now, and please come back and watch the rest of it afterwards. So what kind of entertainment do you think this movie provides? What's the first thing that you think, like the first feeling you think about watching this movie?
I'd say maybe suspense, because I guess the title kind of gives it away a little bit. Catch Me If You Can. There's that whole element of cat and mouse throughout the whole film of this guy, your main character, Frank Abagnale. You don't want him to get caught because he's the person that you're connecting with the most. You kind of know about him a little bit more personally, and you're following him throughout the whole film. And he's obviously doing these things where he, is going to get caught at some point, and you know that he is because the film tells you right at the beginning. It tells you in the opening titles, the animated titles, that he's going to get caught almost. And then obviously it tells you with the television segment when it's the three Abagnales. I forgot what the TV show's called. And so, yeah, I think you kind of know how it's going to end, but there's still that element of suspense throughout in terms of how it's going to happen. And that's, I guess, where the film is interesting, because it's more about how things happen and why they happen rather than what happens. So
I 100% agree that one of the first things is the suspense, even though it's probably only a total of 6-7 minutes of the film that actually suspenseful. But it kind of threads the whole thing together, and it makes it interesting, because otherwise it would be pretty boring.
Yeah.
One thing I do disagree is, and again, maybe I think this was even when I rewatched it now, but now, obviously being older, I almost feel the suspense, but from Tom Hanks' point of view, about come on, you got to catch him, and then like, no, or like, you idiot, look into his wallet and stuff like that. And I think that is part of growing up. When you're a child, you want more of the bad guy to get away with stuff, but now you're like, no, he's like a fraudster, and he's like being silly, and I want him to get caught. Obviously, like in the same way from your side, he's not going to get caught, but you still have suspense. I know he's not going to catch him, but I do think, definitely suspense. Beyond that, it's definitely not comedy, but it's got its funny moments.
For sure, yeah. I think it's, I'd call it like a playful film, and I think the score plays into that really well, where even though the things that are happening, actually, if you put them on paper and these things were happening, or you read about them in the news, you'd be like, this guy's, are we allowed to swear? A dickhead.
Yeah, and I think this is something about the way they chose to make the movie. And you're so right that the music is a huge part of it, but also some of the story elements. They're clearly trying to make this guy seem as innocent as possible. And so I watched the behind the scenes with Steven Spielberg, and he I think has almost an unhealthy compassion for this kid. He gives one possible explanation. When he got started in Hollywood, he sort of conned his way onto a studio a lot. Not nearly to the same extent, but he sort of just confidently strode in, and that's how he got his first meetings and stuff. Right. I don't know all the details, but he said that. And as soon as he said that, I was like, yeah, I can definitely see how you saw a bit of yourself in this guy. And they just, both in the behind the scenes and in the film, they keep making this big thing about he's just a kid, he's just a kid, he's just a kid. And so there's definitely a lot of work being done to make you feel sympathetic. I genuinely think that the reason we have the very first scene, because I don't love the whole flashback, flash forward format, but I think one of the reasons they do it is by showing where he's going to end up in this prison, basically being tortured. You immediately feel sympathy for him. Yeah,
because I guess, you see him when he's 15, 16, and he is just like a sweet kid, and then goes through this thing with his family. So and then you kind of see him at the end point, I guess, of the film almost. So it's like the two extremes do make you feel sympathetic for him. Yeah, it's interesting way to look at it.
And what you just said there is just another thing I love about this movie is the journey. It's it's not an adventure film at all, but it very much takes you on a journey. You see where this kid comes from. Obviously, you know the end from the beginning, so that's a choice. But yeah, you see him. You see where he comes from. You see why he went on the adventure. You see him hone his skills. You know from the beginning that he's smart, but he's also not. He's a natural, but you also see him hone his skills, which is one of my favorite parts of the movie is watching him get good at stuff. Which I've been trying to pinpoint what it is about certain, like whether it's movies or TV shows. One of the things I find the most entertaining is kind of just, I use the term processes, but that doesn't quite do it justice. But this movie, when he's making the checks with the planes, like that there, it's like in The Founder with Michael Keaton is when they figure out how McDonald's works properly, or in Breaking Bad when you see how they deal the drugs using the chicken trucks. Those three things right there are like three of my just favorite bits. I just love watching that. Even those scenes are usually like 30 or 40 seconds. I just find them satisfying. They're very satisfying.
Just the way that things can be done, I guess, and the skills that people can like equip themselves with.
Well, I don't know. Efficiency, I think I
know what you know. Exactly, I know what you're saying, but there's no perfect
but I think
way
satisfying.
To
maybe it's like it's like OCD satisfaction. seeing an idea well executed. In this case, I know I'm going to forge these checks, and then you see him do it with one plane, and then doing it on industrial scale, and then lining up all of the checks in the room. That's just very very satisfying. I was looking back, so again, Spielberg talked about doing this movie right after Minority Report and how he's done obviously a lot of dark movies and that this was going to be, as I said, his dessert movie. And I checked into it, and he actually hasn't done that many lighthearted movies. The only two I could find, again, these are ones that he's directed, obviously he's been involved with hundreds, was The Terminal, which he did just 2 years after this with his buddy Tom Hanks again. The Terminal, I'm obviously a huge Catherine Zeta-Jones fan, but The Terminal is a movie that has not aged well at all in so many ways. So I feel like maybe after doing two lighthearted movies in 3 or 4 years, he said, I'm going to stop for now. The only one I could find that would qualify as lighthearted is the BFG, which I haven't actually seen, which is a kid's movie. I think it's got its dark parts as well. But yeah, these are the only two properly light Steven Spielberg movies. And of course, they star Tom Hanks.
Would you call E.T.? How would you define E.T.?
You're right. I mean, I don't know, some pretty sinister parts to E.T.
There definitely are sinister parts.
It's a kid's, I guess you could definitely argue it because it's a kid's movie.
Yeah.
But then the fact that it's got some very big grown-up
towards
themes.
the end, yeah. For sure.
And then, obviously we'll talk about this extensively in the characters, but the characters are both, mostly Leo characters, just interesting. And, having a movie about an interesting character goes a long way.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, 100%, yeah.
All right, so now we're going to go through Catch Me If You Can, not exactly scene by scene, but we're basically going to go through the story, recap it, and talk about our favorite bits. Mm-hmm. So we'll start, and I know this is one of your favorite bits, the opening credits. One of the best opening credits in movies, don't you?
Yeah. Absolutely. I just love the minimalist aspects of it. The music, I think, kind of sets the tone, as I said before, like the playfulness of the film, but then also the animation just kind of tells you everything that's going to happen, but almost without spoiling it still. So obviously, if you've watched it and then you rewatch the opening credits, you kind of are like, oh, right, that's that bit, that's telling me how these two things happened, or where these two things connected, or what he did here. But I think, you obviously don't know that going into it for the first time. So I think it's just, it's just really playful, really fun, imaginative, and simple in a way, but really effective. Yeah. What do you make of it?
I mean, I feel like I agree with everything you said. I think it's the only other thing, because everything you said is correct. Well, just to reiterate it, I guess it's very artistic but simple, and the Easter egg factor of the fact that you can rewatch it and be like, oh, I know what that's a reference to. Whereas the first one, like, I get it, it's about planes and travel. I guess the big thing also is that I think they go through, because obviously there are 3 or 4 main tunes, theme tunes, and I'm pretty sure they're all woven into the credits, and you kind of get introduced to all of those.
Yeah. So the tones of the film are kind of all weaved in for sure.
So then we get the Tell You the Truth TV show, which, do you know anything about this? Like what it is, why it's in there?
It's a real TV show. In terms of why it's in there, no, you teach me, educate me.
Well, I want to start by asking you what you make of it. So without any context, do you think it works as a beginning? Do you think it's a bit weird?
I think it works as a beginning because it tells you the outcome of the film, which I think because it's obviously presented in a non-linear way, that is almost the way to do it, by saying this is the aftermath of everything that you're about to see almost. So everything you see after that opening bit with the TV show is before the TV show essentially. So I think it's for me it works. I quite like it, and
so you
also
like the narrative aspect, the fact that it's giving you I guess it's a double flash forward.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess as the person watching it, if you knew anything about the film going into it, obviously you know Leonardo DiCaprio, number 2, is the one that is the Frank Abagnale that they're looking for. But I guess if you were going into it completely blind, you would almost have the same experience of someone watching it on TV back then.
I've seen this movie a bunch of times, but I think when I rewatched it the first time more recently, I'd actually forgotten about that scene because it's like quite short and stuff.
Yeah.
But I found it a bit strange. So obviously now I've done all my research, and as you said, it is based on a TV show, but it is so based on the TV show. I need to actually show you the questions, down to the questions they had word for word. But yeah, so pretty much shot for shot, word for word.
Oh, that's so good. No, I've never seen that.
This is relevant now, so I'll explain a bit the chronology. That was in 1977, which is years after the book is over, so the movie is over. Now, basically, according to Frank Abagnale, everything that happened in the book happened. Then he worked for the FBI, and then a few years later, he went on this TV show where he talked about the adventures that we know. That happened. And then after that, he went on Johnny Carson. So that's another one I've
seen that one.
You've seen that one, okay. So I'll put a clip of it for a few seconds for the viewers. But so he went on Johnny Carson apparently 7 or 8 times. So Johnny Carson loved him, and he had him on over and over. And then his notorious, and then I think on the back of that, he got a publicist. Apparently he had a very well-made press kit. People are still kind of wondering what happened there. One of the theories is that, like they say in the movie, he got married around this time, and it does seem like there was no more cons after that. So the theory is that his wife basically was the smart one, was like, here's how we're going to turn this into a money-making machine. And he then wrote the book. So when he was on this, he hadn't written the book yet.
Right.
He wrote the book, came out 3 years after that. Book comes out in 80. It's not clear when, but it got interest of the rights for the rights to make a movie out of the book got passed around Hollywood for years and years. Then they ended up at DreamWorks. Obviously, it's a big company. Spielberg isn't the only director there. And then a bunch of people got attached to it. And then Leonardo DiCaprio, wanting to do more serious roles, found it and basically said, I want to do this. And he kind of seems to be the one who got the ball rolling. But it all started, the fame part of it all started with that real TV show. Okay. Which is why when you know that, you go, it makes a lot of sense that the movie would start with that.
To present that, and very interesting.
So after the TV show, we get into the actual movie. So Tom Hanks and Leo in the French jail. As I said, my theory is that they start with that to show him sympathy. Then we flash back to his upbringing, and we start with the Christopher Walken character as his dad. We're introduced to his mum. We get the 2 mice speech.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the 2 mice speech?
It's not the most inspiring story I never found, but it's enjoyable because of how it turns up again in the rest of the film. Yeah. So when he actually delivers it at the the country club initiation, whatever you want to call it,
Rotary Club. Yeah.
Rotary Club, sorry. at the beginning. I think it is probably a little bit like, cool, strange story to tell, but all right. But then when he brings it up later on, it kind of almost does it more justice. Does it as great?
Yeah, we'll talk about it more in the script part, because I have it not because I love it, but because I think it's a very interesting writing use of it. Because I think the first time you're like, okay, it's a bit corny, but I guess this kind of movie is going to be. But no, there's a lot more depth to it. But so we're introduced to his family. There's that. Not to nitpick, but there's then that scene of his dad and mum dancing and the red wine on the carpet. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't you clean it? Clean it! Like, it really bothers me. Like, I mean, maybe they didn't have the same cleaning products there, but I guess the whole idea is that he's so in love and she's bothered by it, and he's like, "Don't worry," and they trample on it, and that just
stressful.
It pains me. Then we see the necklace con, which I think there's actually a good parallel between the necklace con and the To My Story, because both things are used 3 times, and every time they're actually used in a very specific way. Okay. The whole bank thing. So let's just say that at this point we've seen the dad. Basically, at this point we're building up the dad character, because Leonardo DiCaprio is just watching at this point. Yeah. So we see the dad be introduced, give the To My Story. He's in love with his wife. He does the necklace thing, does the whole suit thing to go to the bank, but fails. His dad's a loser. And maybe the first time you feel sympathy, but when you rewatch it, this is really what you take away from these first 5 minutes.
It's pretty harsh, but yeah.
If his dad was an honest person and was down on his luck, it would be one thing. But it's the fact that he is clearly he's a bad con man. If you're going to be a con man, at least be a good one. Is kind of that's kind of the moral of this movie as well. If you're going to be a con man, be good at it. So, but you feel bad for him. You feel bad for Leo, and then they move. So after the bank con doesn't work, they move. They sell the Cadillac. Move out of the house.
That's right, yeah.
Then, one of my first favorite scenes is, I think it's fair to say, the first Leo con, the first Frank con, is the school scene.
Yeah.
where he pretends to be the substitute teacher.
Yeah.
I love everything about it. I love him getting bullied, the guy telling him, "You look like a substitute teacher," and him turning that on his head and doing it. Obviously, the guy's reaction is amazing. I then love when he's waiting for detention and the folding the note thing with the girl. Mm-hmm. That's one of those which is just like great character building, where you're like, oh yeah, this guy's smart, and this is what this movie's going to be about. It's going to be about details. And then I just love the scene in the office. Like, again, this is all one bit, but in the office when they're like, oh, it's just a silly prank, and they say he did it for a week. Yeah. He gave them homework. He was going to take them on a school trip.
Yeah, I think it's just great way to introduce him. And also I think the moment that I enjoy the most about it is when Frank Sr. comes out, and his mum's obviously a little bit disapproving of the whole situation, but then they just have a little bit of a giggle together. And I think it kind of demonstrates his connection to his family and his relationship with his mum and dad.
And we're like 10, 12 minutes into the movie at this point, and he said the first few minutes he's very passive, and this is the first thing he does, but it kind of comes out of the gate strong about this is what he's going to be about. Then we have the mum cheating, the divorce, and he runs away. I want to talk about the mum cheating thing later in the characters, because I have thoughts on that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it's fair to say at this point we're following some pretty obvious beats of he loves his dad, his mum does not come across great. We feel sorry for the dad. The mum's supposed to be the bad guy. He's distraught. He runs away. For me, that's the end of the first act, kind of the introduction. Mm-hmm. And then he goes to New York, and this is, even though we've had the introduction to him doing the cons, this is where he kind of takes on his life of crime. So kicked out of New York hotel for writing bad checks, changes his date of birth. Again, this is one where the music just kicks in, and you're like, this is like his first big thing.
And I think you build your sympathy in these moments with him, because everything you've seen him do until this point, you can kind of completely understand and appreciate, I guess, to an extent. Like the stuff he does at the school, for example, like he's instantly introduced to the school, and then there's this arsehole of a bully or 2 bullies. So what he does to them, you kind of like, fair enough. And then obviously he's just trying to live at that point. He runs away from home, and then he's just trying to obviously survive. So again, you're sympathetic towards him a little bit, so you don't think anything that he's doing is necessarily bad. So it's like almost like what's the word? Just like slowly drip feeding the things that he's going to do later on, which are much worse. But I guess introducing it slowly make you sympathize with everything that he does.
Yeah, and to be honest, what you said is so important, because I think, again, the movie is very much framed that at every step you understand why he's doing it, which is good storytelling on the one hand, because obviously he's the main character and you are supposed to see his point of view, but then it does get to a point where you've got to wonder, are we just kind of forgiving him for things that are actually crimes? And this is something in the book. You've got to remember, in the book, there's going to be details that we'll talk about that are different, but a lot of the stuff that's done to make him seem sympathetic isn't actually there. So even though all the cons are very similar and you feel for him, clearly I can imagine them in the script session, the movie, they basically said, we need to give more here to kind of sympathize more for him, because we need to. I mean, you have this in movies where someone is killing lots of people and then they manage to justify. So obviously, if you can justify someone killing a bunch of people, you can justify someone writing a bunch of bad checks. One of the big ones is the whole never stealing from the little guy, which is one of the covenants in the book. He says it over and over, and we'll discuss later whether that was true. But yeah, so I love the way you said that, and you're drip feeding it. But the point is that even at the end, when he's printing checks on an industrial scale, you're like, well, of course he has to. He needs to make real good-looking checks.
Yeah. No, I think what you said there is really reigns true for a lot of things, where if someone does something bad, if they're doing it to people that maybe as a culture we see as bad, or that's not affecting individuals or people that don't deserve it, you almost let it have a pass, like a free pass, isn't it, situation? So no, yeah.
In action movies, the easy way to do this is that the people that you're killing kind of have it coming, and so you just see that they're bad people, which very effective.
Yeah.
And then here, I think it's the idea that he really needed it, and the fact that he's not, stealing from, poor people.
Yeah, like John Wick, I think is
John Wick is the obvious one.
Spoiler alert if you're not watching it.
Yeah, like the dog dies.
Yeah.
So he gets kicked out of the hotel, writes bag checks, changes date of birth. Even though a lot of other stuff happens, Frank Abagnale's thing was writing bad checks. It wasn't even forging checks. He did a bit of that, but it was about writing bad checks. So that is writing checks for a real account, but when there aren't sufficient funds. And like Tom Hanks explains, the whole point is that by the time the bank knows that the check is not valid, it's gone around the country twice and you've got the money out. But the whole thing is that he's not able to do this because you still need to have some credibility in the bank, and he's just a kid. And like they say, they don't know you. Then he does the necklace trick once, which is a very funny shot, because you just see him lean over. Yeah. It's actually, he's really good acting. You can just see he goes from being charming to being sneaky looking, and then turning back, and the boss just sitting there.
Yeah. I really like that one continuous. The camera just kind of moves down and up with him again.
Then we have, it's not one of my favorites, but it's one of the most important shots slash scenes in the movie, is when he sees the pilots for the first time. I think it's right after he's failed at the bank. And this is one of those it's not overly sophisticated, but it's just great movie making. He's in the street. It sort of seems like it's dark and cloudy. He's down on his luck. And then he sees the pilot come out of the taxi with a bunch of air hostesses. And they're just like, I'm sure they literally just had a huge spotlight on them. It's just like the sun, it's like the clouds have parted and these people walk straight out of heaven. And he just has this moment. And when you see the real guy, Frank Abagnale, talk about this supposedly real scene, and he really writes it in the book, it's exactly the way it comes across in the movie. It's perfectly that he just saw this, and it's the combination of, this is amazing, I want to be that, also I'm going to use this to be able to achieve my mischievous things.
Right.
Like he says in his letters to his dad, I'm going to become a pilot. That's not what he thinks. He thinks, I'm going to pretend to be a pilot.
Yeah, he knows he can't actually do the things that he's aspiring to present.
Okay. That's a very important point you just made there. One of the angles of this movie is that he's incredibly smart, right? That he passed the bar. He didn't. That he passed the bar just by working. So it's interesting that you say that, because it doesn't even cross his mind to actually become a pilot or a doctor or to go to law school, which I think is one of the important things that the movie skips by. Because let's say you actually had a scene where he said, I'm going to look into how hard it is. And when he finds out that it's like 7 years of training or starting at engineering level and work your way up. And then he said, I'm just going to steal a uniform and pretend to be it. We suddenly wouldn't have a lot of sympathy for him.
So that reminds me of a quote from the film, I think towards the end, when Carl Hanratty says to Frank, it's often easier to live the lie, isn't it? I'm probably butchering the quote, not word for word. But I think that just kind of sums up what the whole film is about. It's about like presentation and the fact that if you do something confidently enough, you can kind of get away with it. And it's not necessarily about doing the thing that you say you're doing. It's more the fact that you're presenting it as if you're doing it. So doing it with that level of confidence and getting everything around you to make it look like you're doing X, Y, and Z actually is more believable to a lot of people than actually doing that thing.
Yeah, it's kind of the ultimate fake it till you make it, but fake it, but you'll never make it because you're not actually trying to make it. So he decides to pretend to be a pilot. He writes a letter to his dad, which I think is an interesting dynamic about the whole correspondence they have. And you see Frank Abagnale Sr. reading it as his life goes down the drain. It's not one of my favorites, but I enjoy the when he goes to Pan Am, gets to interview them and gets all the information. That in the book, he says he did it in the book over the phone, but that seems like one of the most credible things that he did, because I can imagine people would.
Yeah.
I have one nitpick about that scene. So you remember there's a thing about how he sees the FAA license, and he says, "Oh, can I take a picture of it?"
Oh, yeah.
And then he goes, "Even better, Frank, you can have it. It's 3 years expired," which obviously, he's just going to use it to forge it. Why is he carrying around a 3-year expired FAA license?
Hey, I'm sure we've both got things in our wallets that don't need to be there anymore.
Not 3 years expired.
Maybe not 3 years expired, yeah, but I've probably got loyalty cards that are places I'm never going to go to again.
So then he gets the uniform, cons his way into that, starts cashing the checks, bank, hotels. Someone mentions, do them at the airport. And so he realizes he can do it at the airport, and so he needs to start making the Pan Am payrolls. And then we get my favorite scene, using the planes to make the Pan Am checks. And it's just so, obviously making the checks is satisfying, but it's just a detail. It's the detail of using the toys to make them look legitimate. The first time you watch it, you just think, that's ingenious.
Yeah.
And the 15th time you watch it, you think, that's so stupid. There's no way that would actually have worked. But especially as a young person, you just think. This is actually an interesting thing I'm realizing, that for a generation of people who weren't a twinkle in the eye of their parents at the time this movie is set, we don't actually know how things were. So when we see, it was really easy to write bad checks, or it was really easy to get through security and do all that, we don't know any better. Obviously, a lot of people like Spielberg and stuff were, I don't know what age they were when this happened, but these were older people. So it's not... Actually, they say Christopher Walken said in the interviews that he really enjoyed being on set because he remembered he was alive and conscious at the time. So I think the fact that one of the older people in the movie is one of the only ones who actually remembered how it was does actually tell you that it was very much in the past for most people involved in this movie and most people watching it.
Yeah, and I think, obviously I can only say from my own experiences of being alive, but a lot of people will say people just used to be a lot more trusting and a lot more like, they wouldn't necessarily question things quite as much as we do now, because I guess we can...
Well, that's what you think, and there's various things. Okay, a similar one is I think about how I sympathize with the FBI in this, because I think obviously before the internet, it must have been so hard to track these things down. So as a result, we think, we don't even think they're a bunch of dummies. We think it must have just been really hard. But actually, no. According to this book, he got arrested loads really quickly. So it wasn't nearly as easy to do the things that he said he was doing. I know I said I wasn't going to talk about it, but I slipped up. But no, I think it's important here is that part of the simplicity of the movie is that these things seemed really easy. And because people didn't know any better watching it, you kind of buy into it. But it does seem like it was a lot harder to do these things than it actually looked. But anyway, coming back to the magic of the movie, it's just really beautifully simple and naive to see him take those stickers off. And yes, it's a very satisfying scene.
Yeah, and I think it plays into the fact that obviously the film reminds you again and again, he is just a kid. He is kind of very naive, but also clever with how naive he is. As well.
But I think again, when they do that scene is when the Frank scheme, the dun, 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 it literally reminds you it feels like Christmas morning whenever that scene goes, and that's why I've kind of been reconciling all of that this is kind of as if a child wrote a con movie, still smart things like that, and everything about it, the sort of almost like a Christmas bubblegum feel, just these just very easy to digest, fun to watch. Is how it is.
Absolutely, yeah.
But
it's a nice way to summarize it. Yeah.
So he uses the toy planes, makes the checks, goes to the airport, and then discovers deadheading. Has his first deadhead, uses the trick with the necklace for the third time, finally works. And then so he goes on a date with a stewardess that he meets, and then he has that quote afterwards where he says, so when I was rewatching, I was like, does he say that he loves her? But he says, I think this is the best date I've ever been on.
Yeah.
Presumably that means that he was losing his virginity there, right?
I assume so.
Yeah.
I rewatched it last night, and I was like, I'm pretty sure that's what he means.
So then we cut to Tom Hanks.
You missed the best line in the film when she gives him the seat on the plane, and he asks him, "What do you want to drink?"
Oh, and he says the
And it's
milk. So this is a weird one because in his interviews, Frank Abagnale, the real one, claims that he never drank, didn't smoke, didn't do drugs.
Yes, I think I've seen an interview with him.
But I'm pretty sure we do see him drink alcohol later, so it's not as though he doesn't drink at all. I think that the idea is just that he's really young at that point. Because he is 16, right?
Yeah. I think that's what I take from it. He's just like, he doesn't know what to say in that situation because he's probably never really been offered a drink. That's how I interpret it.
Yeah.
And also a bit of comedy,
Yeah, it is funny. So at this point, we cut to Tom Hanks and he explains the whole bank fraud thing. Obviously we've seen him at the beginning in France, but I guess this is probably the first time we see him in the main, we'll call it the primary storyline. So when he explains, he explains it very well. I think obviously Carl is there for the whole chasing part and as like a counterbalance and stuff. He's also there for exposition here to explain how he's getting away with the fraud, with the whole, basically he's taking checks from the West Coast, changing numbers so they get sent to the East Coast and has to be sent back. And that's how he's doing it. So that's a very good explanation. But yeah, we're introduced to Carl. Then we have the dad Cadillac scene in the restaurant, which I think is Christopher Walken's best scene. Leo's still trying to fix the family. We get the two mice speech again, and this is where you start realizing, oh, this is kind of sad. Then I have this as the crux of the family drama. Christopher Walken has given up here on getting her back. Leo has not, which is a very important character thread for him. Then we have Tom Hanks with his colleagues. I've written, my note here is Mr. Serious, which is kind of, it is quite funny when he asks.
In the car?
Yeah, in the car when he asked them, and then he basically like, oh, so I'm stuck with you two idiots. And they're like, hey, which actually, hold on to the fact that they're idiots because I think one of his colleagues turns out to be an absolute genius later on in a teeny tiny detail. Then we have Tom Hanks and Leo's first encounter. So, very important scene. I believe you have some thoughts on that one.
Yeah, one of my favourite scenes, I'd say. I just think it's obviously the first time that you've been seeing these two characters together. You see them have back and forth through the film's editing. Obviously, one person says something and then it'll cut to what the other one is doing. Or obviously, like you said, in the exposition scene with Tom Hanks explaining how the checks are working, and then you see the other side of Leo actually doing it, of Frank actually doing it. So I think it's just, it's a really interesting scene, and that's where the element of suspense kind of...
Yeah, that's the first big suspense.
That's it. Everything's kind of rising, and for the first time watching it, you are a little bit like, how is he going to get out of this situation? And even watching it again, you still kind of have a little bit of that feeling like, oh shit, what's going to happen?
Yeah, but it, like, as I said, as the more I watch it, I'm skeptical about some of the stuff. But if anything, I think the thing that plays the best, not surprisingly given the caliber of the actors, is the human. Because being a con man is two things. It's forging documents, but then it is also the whole human element of it. And that, obviously, Leo plays perfectly. And I think at this point, we don't really know what to think about Tom Hanks. He hasn't really proven to us that he's that smart. We just know that he's quite grumpy. And if anything, this scene definitely doesn't do anything. But the way he plays him, the way everything. I mean, there's probably like 10 different bullet points about the things that he does in that scene, from the confidence to obviously giving him the wallet, to then using the man that he knows outside and pointing him out, and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's when we're like, oh yeah, this guy is like a genius on a human level. And I'm just kind of realizing it, talking it through, that obviously he's like lies to the tellers and stuff, but basically the whole idea of incarnating another character, another person, pretending to be someone else for a long period of time starts from this point. Like literally the next scene, the James Bond suit fitting. I think next thing he's in the cinema, and that's when he watches James Bond. And then he's like, oh, James Bond gets the suit and stuff. And I find that one scene a bit weird, but now that I'm thinking it through, maybe it's the idea of becoming a character, because then the next scene is the Jennifer Garner scene.
Yes,
which you listed in some of your favorite scenes. So why do you find that one so good or interesting?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously an element of like tension to it, because you know that he's just kind of a little innocent kid, and then there's this like attractive woman that he's not even trying to seduce her necessarily. She's trying to seduce him, but then you realize why she's trying to seduce him later on. And I just find it interesting because then she's almost trying to con him, but then he kind of gets it back with the checks, the $1,400 check. So it's just kind of a little bit of like interesting back and forth, and I guess it just kind of shows how quickly he thinks on his feet as well, which I think is just kind of plays into his character.
One of the things I like about that, I think, is after they've done the deal and they're having sex or whatever, they they jump between him banging Jennifer Garner and Tom Hanks being in the laundromat.
Yeah.
Which is just such a perfect parallel. And it reminded me a lot of the scene in Wolf of Wall Street, also one of my favorites, when I don't remember what Leo's doing. It's Leo again. But
one of your favorite Leos or one of your favorite films?
Both.
Okay.
Probably it is my favorite. It's one of my favorite movies, and it's my favorite Leo. So I think it may be soon after he's had the confrontation with the FBI agent, Kyle Chandler. You see him on the tube while Leo is like probably doing something crazy, and it's just this juxtaposition of, you know, the lawman living his mediocre life and then the criminal doing something, you know, super baller.
A lot more exciting.
Oh, when he gets the red thing in the laundry, Tom Hanks. So heartbreaking. Then another very important scene is, it's not favorite but very important, is that it's the first Christmas call. Again, they love the rule of three here. There's three Christmas meetings. I've put this down as, at this point, Leo is on top of the world. He's doing great. His cons are working. He's just banged Jennifer Garner. He's conned her out of money. And even though Tom Hanks has seen him, which I guess is a point in his favor, he doesn't really know where to go from here. Yeah. And this is the other thing that's crazy about this movie, is it's got these two guys, but they're very rarely on screen together and they very rarely interact. Apparently they spent 52 days shooting this, but they were probably only on set together 5 or 6 days the whole time. And this actually, that could have been a good category to do movies where the two main characters don't really spend that much time together.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting number of those actually.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's a very important check-in about, okay, you guys have met and then we're going to have this Christmas call. And I think we'd almost say who wins the call. I think Leo, is this the one where he says at the end, you have no one else to talk to? I think that's the second. It's the second.
First call.
Is it the first?
Yeah, first call.
No, you're right. It is that first call where he says that. But I think up until that point, Leo's kind of winning by saying you have no idea and stuff. But then he says the thing about the Yankees, which was again a quote from his dad, which then leads Carl to know that he's from New York. And then the next scene, I think, is when he's got the phone records and he realizes that he's using the flash, and then he knows he's a kid. And to me, that's kind of a turning point, because between knowing this is New York and knowing that he's a kid, that basically gives him enough information. Like, these are the two first dominoes that he's going to lead to him. I've had it is around the middle of the movie. To me, this is the midpoint where it goes, so far everything's been going swimmingly for Frank, and now slowly, but everything starts going to shit for him, and everything starts going better for Tom Hanks.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point.
And so while they're on the trail, so I think it is literally the next. So after he finds out the name, we have the scene with the mum who's now remarried and stuff. And so talk to the mum, bullshit. And I just love one of my favorite lines at the end when she says, "Oh, let me just write a check and help out." And again, Tom Hanks is out the door, pops his head back and says he currently owes something like $1.5 million. And then just a look on her face. That's like that's one of the really funny moments in the movie.
She's been working part-time at the church.
Yeah.
She got it covered.
Then, I mean, everything hasn't gone to shit yet with Frank, because then he's basically a playboy in Georgia. Meets Amy Adams at the hospital. This apparently, Brenda, was based on a real person. Yeah, it's quite a tragic story. Shocker. I mean, again, actually, if you stop and think about what happens here, it's pretty tragic as well. But again, they managed to frame it in a way that you still feel somewhat sympathetic for him, even though he's been a dickhead to her. Works at the hospital. ER scene. So one of the things that they skirt around, but they could have skirted completely, and I think it's interesting. This is about acknowledging whether he hurt other people. And there's two times, I think, where they bring up the possibility. One is this ER scene when he's actually involved in an incident. But it turns out it's just a broken bone or whatever, which obviously the kid's in pain, but it's fine. In the book, in his own book, he talks about stories of him being involved where there was what's called a blue birth or a blue baby, which is when their umbilical cord is stuck around there, like much more serious stuff. And as a similar outcome, it being okay and him having people concur for him. But it does bring up the uncomfortable truth that what he's doing is fucking dangerous. Yeah. The only other time I can think of when they do this is actually right at the beginning with the school con, when he pretends to be the substitute teacher, and the old lady, the actual teacher, comes in. And again, as a kid, I think you probably you laugh along with it. But it breaks my heart every time, because they could have made a different choice, but they clearly chose a fragile old lady who's her. But it is really horrible the way she's treated and stuff. So I do think it's an interesting choice, because they could have definitely written around both those things. They could have never had the ER scene, and they could have never had the teacher come in or just do something else.
Yeah.
But they're making a point of saying, hey, we're aware this is happening, but also we're not going to go too far into that.
No, that's it. And I think, yeah, if they didn't make Leonardo DiCaprio's character so likable, I think it'd be really hard. You'd be kind of pointing at everything that he does, and you'd be like, hang on a second, that's not okay. But I think the fact that the way they introduce him at the beginning and the music, I think plays into it a lot as well, the playfulness of it all. I think that definitely adds to you not maybe questioning things quite as much as you might in real life.
And the fact that, because it is that scene where he has the concur thing, right? Where he says
that's the one with the kid's leg.
They use that term in the book and stuff, but they've already built it up to be a joke because of the fact that he's seen it on TV.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is where you're getting into layers of writing and how they're building it up. So they're showing you something serious, but then they're layering in a joke to kind of make it slightly lighthearted.
Yeah.
And it works because you don't think about it too much.
Yeah, and the fact that he's getting his things from the screen as well. He's like watching TV and he's like, oh, I'm going to take that from James Bond. Yeah. I'm going to take that from this movie and I'm going to apply that to a really potentially dangerous real world situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So then Amy Adams tells him about having the abortion. Takes him home. Martin Sheen and the wife are introduced. They get engaged. There's that funny scene where when he said, he's talking to the dad one-on-one and it's like, oh, ask me the question. He says, can I pass the bar? And he's, no, ask me that. We'll talk about that a bit more in the actors when we talk about Martin Sheen. Moves into law, passes the bar. One of my favorite scenes, like 30 seconds, is the court scene. When again, he's watching the TV, like you said. And he does, you watch it and he sounds pretty convincing. Yeah. You're like, that's good. And then it's one of my favorite quotes that the judge says, what the hell is wrong with you? That's just funny. And, it's a lighthearted moment of showing this guy. This is the thing. He's good at pretending to be these jobs, but he's not actually. This is the reason he wasn't flying planes and why he should be in charge. He's not actually good at doing it.
That's it. Yeah, when stuff gets too real, that's when you can kind of get exposed. Yeah, and he obviously does a bit there.
Then there's the scene with the family where they sing that song while they're watching TV. That's a weird scene, right?
Yeah, I know what you mean. There is the odd scene where you're a bit like, oh, okay, this is just kind of happening a little bit.
So there's a TV show the family obviously watch, something Amy blah blah blah, and they all sing along. Amy Adams' character gets onto Martin Sheen's lap, which this is back in the day. She's obviously a daddy's girl. As I'm saying it, I'm realizing maybe it's meant to show the fact that their bond has been repaired. Because they kicked her out of the house for having the abortion. But then I think the purpose of the scene is there's that look on Leo's face. Even though I'm saying that, like, this is fucking weird. He's looking around, like, this is what I want. This is like, because we actually haven't talked about this very much. But again, one of the sympathetic things is that he's just the guy that wants a family. He wants, he wants to get his parents back together. He wants to settle down. He wants to, because he's a kid. He wants the family and love and stuff. And there is, I think in that moment, he seems very comfortable and at home. And then afterwards, you have the second Christmas call, and he basically begs him to leave him alone. Because that's the thing. He said, I want to stop. I found what I want. Yeah. And I'm done. And obviously he then says no. But he uses the information about him being married to find him. Then there's the wedding party, leaving Amy Adams. Do you have anything to say about any of those scenes?
Yeah, I mean, the scene I think we mentioned just before about when it's the family singing and dancing. I don't know if it's just before that when he sees the mum and dad, Martin Sheen, and I forget the actress's name.
Yeah.
But they're dancing. Yeah. And I think he's his mum and dad. Yeah, that's it. And he's kind of looking at that as if to be like, oh, this is nice. This is what I want. And then the next scene, 100% see what you're saying about, this is like family. But I don't know, there's something in his face. I don't know if it's me, just the way I'm interpreting it, that it's just not... It's not quite his almost, right. And he knows it's sincere for them, but it's not sincere for him. So
you think he's a bit uncomfortable?
I think there is an element of it, because then even when he starts singing along, I don't necessarily think he's fully invested. He's not fully there. They're fully kind of into it, and it's great for them. And it's nice that he's been able to, I guess, bring those together. But I guess he's done it in an insincere way, so he doesn't feel necessarily sincere about his involvement, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this is where. It's by far not. It's not at all the most important scene, but literally, we could spend an hour. We could spend 30 minutes debating exactly what he meant, because I totally see what you mean. I saw it as, this is what I want. and now I'm going to go along with it. Now, talking to you, I'm thinking, this is what I want. This is weird, but I'm going to sing along to fit in, so it's a con. But literally, the only person who would be able to tell you would be Leonardo DiCaprio about what were you thinking in that moment? Were you trying to look uncomfortable? Yeah. And then, this is when, the fact that one facial expression can be so charged just like shows you. This was a huge challenge, I think, for an actor. Leo makes it look easy at times, but this could have gone so wrong.
Oh god, yeah. Because I guess he's playing multiple people within this role, isn't he? He's not just playing Frank Abagnale. He's playing Frank Abagnale pretending to be Frank Taylor, pretending to be Frank Connors, pretending to be so and so and so and so and so.
And then when you because apparently, so he met the real Frank. Apparently, he spoke to him on the phone. He spent a couple of days with him, and he said he was just asking him questions, making trying to learn as much as he could about him. And that always sounds a bit douchey when an actor says that, but this is why, because he probably wants to be able to think what would for the real Frank think in this situation and like reflect it on face and stuff. But and this is why this movie is so interesting, because there's like so many layers to it. So then after all of that, he leaves because they arrive at the wedding party. He has the whole thing with Amy Adams about meet me in Miami. Miami scene, and then he can't get through the airport, so he goes to the colleges to recruit the air hostess. Flies through I think it's funny the fact that he beats them that way.
One of my favorite scenes, I'd say, when he kind of makes it through the airport.
I think the thing that's really satisfying, purely from a new movie point of view, is that obviously he saw them in New York, the pilot surrounded by these stewards, and he's done all the things, but he hasn't recreated that image. And this is literally, he's kind of gone full circle. He is now fully the person that he wanted to be. Not so much in the story, but visually it's just kind of a nice callback. And then the plane flies off and Tom Hanks realizes that he misses him. There's a funny bit where there's the decoy, and then there's like a flash forward. It's like, he's been traveling around Europe. This is where I say is the end of Act 2. So the second act is usually the bigger one. It's like all the all the fun stuff, we've had some back and forth. The next few minutes it kind of seems really bad for Tom Hanks, and then there's like a click. And then it's basically all downhill.
Right, it's like almost like he lost him, but then...
Yes, I mean, he does lose him here for, I think it's meant to be a year or a year and a half.
Oh, okay.
The next scene is Tom Hanks with his boss being like, Mexico, Spain, Italy, here are all these checks.
Right,
So maybe it's months, maybe it's not years, but it's a long time. But his boss pretty much tells him, well, you've lost him, so tough shit. And then they go to the print. This is one of my favorites. Just, I don't even know why, but again, it's the same thing as the planes. Next scene is they go to the printers, the professional printers in New York, where they're looking at the check and they're basically evaluating. And I think it's just kind of the fact that these are the actual experts. Obviously, they're not crooks, but they talk about, it's the paper's this thick and he's used this machine and it needs to be this weight to get the colors to bleed and stuff. And so I find that one quite interesting. And then they start talking about, well, where could he be doing that? And then they say, France. And then Tom Hanks says the thing, France. This is where I was saying about his colleagues being idiots. This is over a year after they had the conversation with the mum, right? Mm-hmm. And Tom Hanks goes, wait, his mum said she was from a small town. The detective takes out, his classic ye-olde mini notebook, goes back 3 pages, and it's like, blah, 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 Montrichard.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's like silly and easy for the movie, but for me, there's just something very... not in a seriously satisfying way, but it's just funny to be like, he just had that at ready. So, very competent colleagues, it turned out. So they go to Montrichard, have their third Christmas showdown in person.
Showdown.
That's what I called it.
Yeah, I'll go with that.
Then there's the whole thing about trusting him and going out with the police, which is, it's cheesy, but I guess I can see why they put it in there. I think there hadn't been, I feel like they're acting as if there'd been more build up about these two trusting each other. It kind of implies that Carl has betrayed Frank before and that he has reason to not trust him. And I feel like they kind of make it into a bigger thing than it actually is. Like, he's the honest one here. He's not a crook like you. But then I do enjoy the fact they come out and he's like, well done. And then all the police arrive. Yeah. So this is one thing I found very confusing that I was reading the timeline. So how long do you think there is between his arrest and then the beginning of the movie where he's like visits him in the prison and he's all like looking like shit?
I don't know if the film necessarily indicates, besides him having a beard and long hair, 2 years?
Yeah, so it's a year and a half.
Okay.
But somehow, like logically with the hair and stuff, sure. But in my mind, it wasn't that long. And it's just a weird, again, it's supposedly based on a true story. I think it's based on the timeline in the book. But so then we've jumped back forward a year and a half. to what is now the present time, repatriation, the plane scene, seeing the mum one last time, that she's obviously moved on with a new family.
Yeah.
Then he's in prison, helps the FBI, works with the FBI, thinks of going on the run, and then closing title card. Frank Abagnale is now like a super renowned person and works with the FBI, blah, 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 and a whole bunch of other lies. And that's the end of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Hi guys, here's how you can win this month's prize. The Catch Me If You Can Blu-ray, the Catch Me If You Can book by Frank Abagnale Jr., and The Greatest Hoax on Earth, which is a journalistic investigation into the real life of Frank Abagnale. And honestly, the stuff in this is crazy. So to win these prizes, all you have to do is follow us on Instagram at Dom's Film Club. I'll put a link in the description. You just have to follow us and DM us, Catch Me If You Can. And a month after this episode drops, we'll be doing a sweepstakes for every follower that has sent us that message. And one of you will win these prizes. So the way I like talking about actors and character, well, more the characters and then by extension the actors, is kind of going from worst. And it can be, they're shit, I hate them too, they're the weaker link.
Okay.
So who do you have as, again, the character, not the actor, the weakest link of the movie?
I wouldn't necessarily say anyone's a weak link as such, because, I don't know, weak link to me makes it seem like they bring the film down a little bit.
Yeah, no, okay, maybe a character that you'd like the least. Again, I think in a lot of movies you could definitely find a weak link, but this is a very strong movie, character and cast-wise. But is there a character that you like the least?
I say maybe the mum. I guess obviously the way she's presented. I don't think she's necessarily portrayed negatively, but I think because Frank Sr. is portrayed quite positively and he's a little bit more in tune with Frank Jr., them to get along, and you obviously follow Frank Jr., so then it's easier to kind of see his side of the whole situation a lot more. And then obviously she, in the story of the film, cheats and
I think
it breaks up the family.
It's very fair to say she's absolutely portrayed negatively. I don't think she has any redeeming qualities. She's shown as a cheating whore who breaks up the family, who doesn't really care about him, who then moves on. There's never anything about her looking for him or anything, just the sign of things. So she's very much
never reaches out.
And there's another thing that is almost weird, is the smoking. Mm-hmm. Because this is the only, anytime there's a movie where smoking is pointed out, especially in a movie over a period of time, you can bet that person's going to die of cancer in the movie. Like, it just always happens. And on this past rewatch, I said, because he brings it up multiple times. You said you were going to quit. It's bad for you, blah, blah, blah. And I've just realized this week, there is no follow-up on that. It's literally 40, 50 seconds in the movie about that, which there's no payoff.
Right.
So my conclusion is they literally just put it there to make her seem even worse. And so I'll take a second to say the actress is great. I think she's good. She's very well regarded French actress who's been nominated for loads of French awards. Also, new segment that I'm going to be calling Le Coin de Dominique. So for those of you that don't know, I actually grew up in France. I speak French fluently. And one of my pet peeves is when you have French characters who do not speak French properly. And it happens a shocking amount of time. It's either actors who can speak it well enough that 99% of non-French people will fall for it, or sometimes it'll be Canadians speaking with a Canadian accent pretending to be in French. Off the top of my head, Home Alone comes up as one really bad one where there's French people who don't sound anything like French people are supposed to. But in this case, I'm giving it a 10 out of 10. Obviously, the fact is she is a real French actress.
That helps.
She speaks English with a very normal, I think she even says in the behind the scenes, like, I was very good at doing the French accent in English because that's just the way I speak. So yeah, she gets a 10 out of 10, but it's not a given. But it almost bothers me more about the fact that she's a good actress who gives a great performance, as good as you could, but the role is a very negative one. And again, if you want to know more about the real mom later on, you can ask me. It makes what I just said about the character even... Okay, put it this way. The real mother sued DreamWorks, apparently. It was all out of courts, but it has been said that she sued them and won, she got a settlement because of her depiction in it. Because they used her real name and everything.
Right. Was there anyone that you disliked in the film? Or... So
the mom character I dislike, which is why I dug into it a bit more. But I still agree she's a horrible character. She's a villain. What do you make of Jennifer Garner's performance in this?
Oh, it's amazing. One scene absolutely smashes it.
Do you know the story behind it?
No.
So she was probably filming season 2 of Alias. So season 1 of Alias had been on it. And apparently Spielberg loves TV, not surprising at all, and loved Alias.
Yeah.
And basically, for all the actors, it seems like every single one of them, they were basically like, Spielberg was like, I've got a list of people and I want to work with, and you're on it. And then the actors would go, yeah, you're Steven Spielberg. I'll work with you. Obviously, she was like a much more junior actress, but he said, I've got this one scene. Do you want to be in it? And apparently, again, there's an behind-the-scenes interview with her. She'd been filming all week Alias. She came to set. She did it in like one day. And yeah, knocked it out of the park, got the hell out of there. But yeah, it's just funny because she's like right at the beginning of her career.
Yeah.
Obviously, she was more advanced. Amy Adams was really at the beginning of her career. They did a very good job in casting the young women in this.
Yeah, and I actually rewatching it recently after not watching it again for a few years. I think I actually kind of had forgotten that a lot of quite big name actresses were in it, like those two, for example, and what's her name? It's falling out of my head now. She's in a lot of comedy films.
Yeah, this is going to be in the quiz later. You're going to have to remember
Oh,
it.
man.
The mother, Amy Adams' mother, I don't feel like she doesn't have a real scene about her, so we're not including her. But Martin Sheen obviously has the big scene with Leo. So he was working on The West Wing at the time. He was one of those that Spielberg said, I offered it to him. I didn't think he would take it. But Martin Sheen was like, I want to work with Steven Spielberg. So he came for a couple of days. Here's a question about his character. Do you think he suspects Frank? Is he like, and when does he stop? How do you interpret how he feels about it?
Yeah, I think he 100% does because of obviously the questions he asks him right at the beginning about the dog and things like that. He asks about his professor. Was Hollingsworth or something?
Yeah.
Were they at the
good memory,
university? Thank you. And then he asks about the dog, and just the way that he asks him, he doesn't ask like,
you're
did
right.
he still have his dog? He's like, what was the dog's name? Which is quite a weird question to ask someone, because if I said to you, I know this person, you wouldn't then say, you'd say, oh, how's the dog? Not what was their dog's name.
So do you think after the dog thing, he's like, okay, he's straight?
I don't even necessarily think so. I think he still probably suspects that he's not who he says he is. I mean, he's a young guy. He's a doctor. He's a lawyer. It's like quite a weird situation. And also he obviously this guy doesn't have the most respect for his own daughter. Which is not very nice, but obviously, the fact that he just kind of says like, "What are you doing with my daughter?" Basically, like, you're a doctor, lawyer, blah blah blah, X, Y, and Z, and then the fact that he kind of just accepts it. I think he's just kind of happy that maybe in a backwardsy weird way that his daughter is happy. In a strange way, but even though it's not maybe the most sincere situation, it's not the most sincere situation, but I think he's just kind of like, oh, okay, she's happy. This dude's in it for his own reasons, but he doesn't seem to be harming anyone in doing it. So I just kind of let it be.
I agree totally. And I think, again, I thought about it, but talking about it, it is actually a really interesting con. And I think it is one of the reasons why con men succeed is he tests him. He passes the original test satisfactorily. And then basically, because a good con man doesn't make you feel like you're winning, but they kind of make it seem like the whole thing with the pilot. It's not expressed, but we didn't say it. The reason why pilots get treated so well is because they're supposed to be, very respected people in society who make a lot of money, and that any bank would be honored to have them bank with them. Hotels are happy to have them. Women are happy to date them. It's not just out of these people are amazing. It's beneficial to them. We will treat them like royalty because we want their business. And I feel like here that's and it's actually a very similar transaction of, well, prove to us that you're a pilot. Oh, you've got the uniform on, you pass. What was the name of the dog? You gave an answer, you pass. And now they basically either have to be like, we're going to question whether you're a pilot, I'm going to question whether that's true, or are we just buying 100% and we get to benefit from it? And I think that's it, is that once you get past that, the people who are in on the con think that they can benefit. I mean, exactly like with the Jennifer Garner character, is that she thinks that she's conning him in a way. And the Martin Sheen character, obviously it's a very antiquated, sexist thing that they do to the daughter, but the fact is he does not think highly of his daughter. He probably does wish that he could marry her off to a lawyer, pilot, doctor, whatever. And now it benefits him for this to be true. So he now then helps him pass the bar or all that sort of stuff. So I think, by that point, I think he's very much bought in and is fully on board. Because that's kind of the thing, is that once you get on board, you have to be 100% with a con man. You can't... This is a horrible analogy, but it's kind of like when someone thinks that their partner is cheating. they kind of have to get to a point. Well, either they accept they are and they're okay with it, but most of the time you either say they are and you leave, or you just have to be in complete denial, whether you're correct or not. And obviously, a lot of the time, the people who are in denial are wrong, and that's what's painful for people around it. Again, I'm going off on a tangent here, but it is like, I mean, cheating is a form of con. Anyway, all that's to say that we think that by the time that he thinks he's going to marry his daughter, he's basically like, this is good for me, I'm going to choose to believe it. Amy Adams.
I think she's amazing. I think she's an unbelievable actress anyway. Obviously, from Arrival. I recently watched Nocturnal Animals for the first time. Really bizarre but very good.
Is that
film.
Jake Gyllenhaal?
That's the one. Yeah. Would recommend. I don't think the DC films are amazing. I don't love them all, but I think she's great in her role in those. Yeah, I've enjoyed her in pretty much everything I've seen her in, and I think in this, obviously, she plays quite a different character where obviously she's a more established actress in those other films and is a lot more confident and probably has a lot more of a say as well as a female figure, whereas in this she's obviously doesn't, and then she's being lied to obviously by the main character. She's not treated particularly nicely by her parents, or I guess that's what we learn about her rather than what we actually visually see necessarily. But yeah, I think she's like a victim in the film, definitely, but I think she just does an amazing job in the film.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest Amy Adams fan, and one of the things is she's been nominated for something like 6 or 7 Academy Awards, and I do not think that she warrants that. I also find her character in The Office just so annoying. The Office was a couple of years after this that she was on it.
Yeah. And
then even after that, it was years and years. I think one of her first starring roles I found was in Leap Year, 2010. Mm-hmm. It's not as though this was like a star-making role for her. She was in The Office a couple of years after. Then she had some more critically acclaimed and some commercially successful. And then, I think the 2010s were when it really kicked off for her. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a very fun... And I think she's really good in this. I think she starts off kind of in that ditzy, annoying way. You're like, ugh, her. But then you understand that the fact that he's giving her this attention, why she would be into it. Because, he's a doctor. But the thing is... I don't know how young she's supposed to be. She's definitely older than him. I think there's something interesting about the fact that he's relating to this very youthful girl. It's obviously like she's closer to him mentally than his actual age. And then everything else makes sense about her. Like obviously you would go along with it. You would embrace the opportunities given, get back with your family. And then ultimately... the way that he leaves her and he betrays her, yes, she did the right thing.
100%.
Christopher Walken. So, as I said, best supporting actor. Neither Tom Hanks nor Leo got nominated for this. Okay, let's even put Christopher Walken aside, but do you think that's a travesty?
Oh, God, that's a strong word. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think Tom Hanks plays like a bit of an unusual character for him, which isn't necessarily a good or bad thing, but I wouldn't necessarily say wow, he was a standout in that necessarily. I think Leonardo DiCaprio probably more so because he's in the whole, pretty much in the majority of scenes, isn't he? Christopher Walken, I think, does stand out because he's in, I guess, a limited number of scenes, especially as the film goes on. But there's just a likability to his character that you just, I guess that's through a bit of, almost like Leonardo's performance helps Christopher Walken's performance in a way because that's what helps.
Yeah, he admires him, so we admire him.
Exactly, yeah. So Frank Senior, you're just like, I like this guy, and Christopher Walken just plays it in such a way. And I think from what you said earlier about Frank Senior being a little bit pathetic in a lot of ways, I'd never really looked at it like that. But actually, the fact that Christopher Walken plays it in such a way that I've not seen it like that, but then I can see it now that you've brought it up, makes me appreciate it a little bit more.
When someone comes across that way, they can either seem like it can be a huge negative, or you can feel sympathy for them. And you absolutely, when I say he's pathetic, I feel a lot of sympathy for him. He is, he's a very particular type of character that's actually more common in life than movies, but of people who have made some bad decisions. It's a combination of bad decisions and bad luck, but you've got to think that his heart wasn't in the wrong place. Like he's a romantic. He loves his son. He loves his wife. He's not trying to defraud Pan Am or whatever. He's just doing some slightly dodgy things, like bending the rules as opposed to breaking them type of thing. Because that's the thing, he's not trying to steal money from the bank. He's just trying to come across in a better way by having a chauffeur. Here's an interesting one. In the book, his dad wasn't a con man at all. There's nothing about him ever doing anything like that. So this is probably a good time to say that the character of the dad is probably the one that's been the most changed from the book. because, and it's done clearly for story purposes, as we said, to make Frank Jr. seem more sympathetic. They build this whole story arc about the fact that he felt sympathetic for his dad, that he wanted to keep his dad and his mum together. In the book, it's actually the opposite. Frank Jr. realizes they're never going to get back together, and he says until the day he died that Frank Sr. was desperately trying to get his mum back. Whereas in the movie, it's the opposite. Okay. He's trying to, and he's like, she's gone, man. She's remarried. I have to get over it. So they've switched that. They've also made him, again, not a con man, but the fact that he's the one who's introduced it. You very much get the idea that because the necklace thing is very much, we saw that he learned it from his dad. But an interesting switcheroo is that the turning up with the chauffeur thing is something that in the book Frank Jr. says that he does years later. I think it's around the Jennifer Garner period when there's no mention of an Aston Martin in the book. He drove around in a Rolls Royce for a bit, and he said he would specifically choose banks where there was windows outside, so he would turn up in the bank in a Rolls Royce, either with or without a chauffeur, make sure they could see him, and then come in and do some complicated con with checks going through different things. So that was, again, we're taking the book gospel here. That was actually Frank Jr.'s con that in the movie they decided to make the dad do as a way of introducing it to him. Another important detail is the whole correspondence between the two of them is not in the book. And Frank Abagnale Jr. says this in interviews that he claims that the divorce scene happened that way, that I think it was in court, not in the house. They said, you need to choose your mum and dad, and he ran away and he never came back, and he claims that he never saw his dad again until he died. So that's very much a claim that he's made in public, and that's in the book, and that might not be true. But yeah, so I think they've given a lot more complexity to the Christopher Walken character, and yeah, they chose it makes him a much more interesting character. He's a much more interesting character than the mum, who's just this one-dimensional villain, basically. And yeah, they chose an amazing actor to play him. So you think one of the things I mentioned earlier, the restaurant scene where he gets all choked up, they say in the behind the scenes that they obviously Spielberg is the type of person who does 5-10 takes, and I think he's quite open to them doing things in different ways and being like, try it. And without prompt, he was doing it straight, he was doing it serious and stuff. And Christopher Walken just did this one shot where he just gets really emotional and actually starts crying and stuff. And yeah, there's actually a really cute behind the scenes bit where afterwards, like, it's been cut, and Christopher Walken says, "Oh, if you want, I can do it straight." Spielberg's like, "No, Chris, that was great." And you can just see that Spielberg is like, you see it whenever, like, either behind the scenes or movies about movies, when the director is like, "That's it, that's the shot." And again, I think it's on rewatching it, a part of me is like, wait, why is he actually, does it make sense for this person to cry here? But I think if you want to take it charitably, it is just the bubbling up of all this emotion, because he's got his son who's left, his life has fallen apart, he's never achieved anything. And the thing that he says, "My son got me a Cadillac today." And the other thing I think is super interesting is, at the beginning, he's all very pragmatic. "Why are you getting me a Cadillac? The IRS is going to take it. Like, this is stupid." He's very, and then he starts talking, and you can see he almost cons himself. He's obviously taken in on Leo's, all the stuff he's telling him. And then he just gets really emotional, and you can see that basically I think they were talking about the mum, and that's when he's saying, "No, she's gone. She's getting remarried. She's not going to, I'm not going to see her again." And I think the emotion of that, he then decides, like, you know what, let's just have fun for a minute and be like, "My son bought me a Cadillac," and stuff. And it is quite moving to be like, "Oh, this poor guy."
No, I like that way of looking at it, actually. It's like he almost, it's very matter of fact to begin with, but then the emotional element kind of takes over for him.
And this leads to my big question about him. Again, this is subjective. When do you think, you see him when he gets the letter, you don't really see a reaction about it. "I've decided to be a pilot," and he's smiling and everything. And then in the scene in the restaurant, nothing explicitly says it's a con. He's like, he says something skeptical. Leo doesn't say anything dodgy. Would you agree that up until the end of that conversation, he thinks that everything's like, that he's legit? And just for further context, there's this scene a couple of scenes later when there's in the bar, and he clearly he knows, because Tom Hanks has come to see him at this point, and he's, actually, I forgot that in the scenes. I forgot this in the scene.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, the Vietnam one. He's like, "Off in Vietnam, and here you are." Another great scene. But anyway, my question is, taking all that into account, at what point do you think he knows that his son's a crook?
Ooh, really good question. I don't think anything gives it away in that restaurant scene, but I still don't think that Christopher Walken, Frank Senior, is fully convinced with the whole thing, because I don't know, just from a logistical, maybe matter of fact point of view, the fact that it's not actually been that long.
Yeah,
since
he
she's
knows.
run
He
away.
knows his real age.
Yeah, that's it. He knows Frank, and he's like, "How have you managed to?"
But he doesn't. But he doesn't ask him any questions.
He doesn't ask him any questions.
Yeah, you're
but
right.
in
So he knows. Yeah.
In my head, I'm thinking in his head, he's like, "Well, how have you managed to do all this?"
Yeah, you're right.
In the last few months, necessarily. So that's the way I see it. But
No.
there's nothing in the film that explicitly.
No, but you're
says
right.
that.
If he'd asked the question, he gave him a bullshit answer. You
Yeah,
could
yeah.
say, okay, well, he tried.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, you're right. He knows.
But then obviously, in the next scene, in the bar scene, which I think I really like that scene between the two of them, just the change in. I think that's when.
Yeah, he sees
Frank
the post
Jr.
office.
That's it. I think that's when Frank Jr. kind of actually realizes, like, oh, then maybe not. They're not getting back together, and everything I've been trying has not been working. And here's where it's like falling completely flat.
I think that's the last time they see each other, right?
That's right.
Because he's trying to invite him to the wedding, and he
That's
says,
right.
"I'm."
Yeah.
And again, he's trying. He's like, "We'll put you in a suit. You'll meet mom. She'll come back to you."
Yeah.
And I think that scene is actually right after he sees Amy Adams' parents together, and I think it's literally the next scene. So he's clearly like clinging on to this
That
fantasy.
link, yeah.
But yeah, so we're talking about that character, but then we'll talk about the Vietnam speech when he says, it's well acted, because he says, "Oh, do you know where he is?" And he's like, "Yeah, I do. I'll tell you everything." And you go, "Oh, okay. He's off in Vietnam, dying, crawling through the mud." And the thing I also like about that scene is we've seen Frank Senior talk shit, but we didn't know for sure. Like, oh, is it the IRS that's after him? Maybe not. Maybe he did something illicit.
Yeah.
There's just various things that he talks about that you don't necessarily know. On rewatch, you know that he's probably full of shit. But this is the first time that we know categorically what he's saying isn't true. And it's like watching someone lie when you know 100% that they're lying. Because you can see someone and be like, I think he's full of shit, but I don't know. But if you knew that, like, someone had never been to France and you saw them talk about France like they'd been there, you'd be like, whoa, this is weird, because I know 100% that you're lying. And so it kind of shatters the mirror. And I think that is when maybe I feel a little less sorry for him in that scene.
Okay.
Although, like he says, I'm not going to rat on my son, so...
Yeah, you kind of completely get where he's coming from, like the fact that he wouldn't do that, because he does love his... I think that's one of the genuine things in the film that you really believe, is that Frank Jr. does love his family, and Frank Senior loves his family as well, but I think they obviously just have slightly different perspectives on it. It could just be a maturity thing or an emotional thing, where Frank Senior has kind of accepted that this isn't a thing anymore. This, like, the family unit isn't together, whereas obviously that's where Frank Jr. struggles a lot to actually accept that, and that's kind of what drives him to do everything in the film, really.
So I see what you're saying, but here's another point. When I think it's the when he's in the post office thing, he says, "Oh, I think it's the Amy Adams scene, then the Christopher Walken scene, and then it's the second Christmas one where he begs Carl to leave him alone." He asks his dad to tell him to stop, because I think at that point they have acknowledged that this is a con, and his dad doesn't. A part of me wonders whether he actually loves him. This last time I did start wondering whether Frank Senior is a narcissist, and that he only loves his son as like a vessel for himself. So he's super proud and happy when he's a successful pilot, ignores the reality it's impossible, and so more or less consciously loves it because it makes him look good. And there's that weird thing he says where he says, "Everyone in this restaurant is looking at you," and Frank Jr. says, "No one's looking there." And I'm sure, have you looked around in that scene? No one is looking. And I almost wish maybe there was one more shot to just clearly show that no one is looking, but it is just this weird distortion of reality. And I think he's potentially a narcissist, definitely a bit of an egomaniac, like living in like delusion and stuff. But all that to say, interesting character.
Very. I like that. That again gives me another good reason to rewatch it. To kind of pick up on those little things more.
So that brings us to the stars, unequivocally. We'll start with Tom Hanks, and then we'll do Leo. So for context, I talked about Spielberg having come from darker movies and doing more fun ones. Tom Hanks, in the last couple of years before this, had done Road to Perdition, Castaway, and The Green Mile. So I think he as well wants to do something cheerful. And as I said, The Terminal soon after. So clearly him and Spielberg said, let's do this more. This is a lot better than The Terminal. Like I said before, you feel for him in the same way that you feel for Kyle Chandler as Patrick Denham in Wolf of Wall Street. He's not as complex as the Christopher Walken or the Leo one, but he has to juggle a lot of things. And after we do Leo, we're going to do the recasting. And I think one of the important things in the recasting that you really have to pinpoint what are the important traits of this character. And so, what would you say are the important traits of the Carl character, and how, and obviously Tom Hanks does well?
I think being quite neutral for the most part until the end when he kind of opens up a little bit more emotionally. I think the fact that you can't really
neutral as in you don't know much about it.
You don't know much about what's below the surface. Like, you take everything as quite a matter of fact in terms of what he says and what he does. Like, he's an FBI agent and he's hunting this man because he is a man of the law, and this person that he's hunting is not a person of the law. That's kind of just as much as you know about him, really. And then even when later on, when in the car scene, when they're like, "Oh, you're so serious," that's like, I guess, him just basically saying, "Shut the hell up. This is the job we've got to do, and this is how I am." Basically, I think, yeah, you kind of take him as quite neutral and matter of fact until a little bit later on when you actually feel like an element of care and rapport that he has towards Frank Jr.
Yeah. At the beginning, so in my quotes, I have one of his first lines, which is, I don't have it in front of me right now, but basically one of my favorite lines is when he says, "I've worked too hard and too long. If he dies, I'm holding you responsible." And that's one of his first lines. And you think, whoa, this guy's pretty matter of fact. Mm-hmm. And then when you have the whole him being like rude to his people and stuff, I think they are definitely trying to make him seem like an asshole for a bit. But then they that you have Tom Hanks playing him, which is again like a Joker. Like, no one's ever going to really dislike him.
Yeah.
And then as you get forward and you see little breadcrumbs of his lives, like being alone on Christmas, and then also being made a fool of, you feel bad for him. I think again the laundromat scene goes a long way and be like, oh, this poor fucking schmuck. Yeah. But I have the important things is it's smart but not too smart. Hardworking and honest is like a very important thing, which is obviously the opposite. Yeah. Like, he's working hard on his, government agent salary while this guy is going around. And I think maybe Leo gets to that point where you're like, okay, he's overdoing it a little bit. It's kind of when your sympathy starts tipping a little bit.
Yeah. I think as well, he's an interesting character because he's, I guess, the oppositional force to the main character who we're like rooting for the most part. So you'd kind of think, oh, this is supposed to be the villain in like archetypal sense, whereas it's not really a story about heroes and villains as such in the typical sense. I know you said earlier the mum can be seen as a villain, but besides kind of being the trigger for what Frank Jr. does, she doesn't actually really interfere with the story after that.
So I love that you said that, because it's the perfect setup for this. In one of the interviews, Tom Hanks described, and this is when you know like an actor is good, because they not only are acting well, but they say smart things. He's an antagonist with a protagonist bend. Mm-hmm. So he is the antagonist, like you say, but you do almost like when you're rewatching it, you can almost, obviously you're spending a lot more time with Leo, but you can almost rewatch it through his lens and be like, come on, you're the guy.
Exactly.
And he's the honest one. He's the one who's doing the hard work. And obviously by being played by such a talented and likable actor as Tom Hanks goes a long way. I rewatched, because we talked about it on The Mask of Zorro, episode 1, check it out if you haven't, when we talked about Antonio Banderas, and I'd been reminded that he was in Philadelphia. Have you seen Philadelphia?
No.
So I rewatched that the other night. It is so good. So do you know about it?
No, don't know much about it.
This is exactly Frosty. So I'm recommending Philadelphia to everyone. It's Tom Hanks is a gay lawyer in the 80s or 90s who gets AIDS and gets fired because of it. And he's got this other lawyer played by Denzel Washington who's very, very different from him, who ends up defending him. And so it's all about the trial, but also about what it was like having AIDS. And Antonio Banderas is his boyfriend. But very different role from this, but worth mentioning. Great movie. You should check it out. I think it's on Netflix. That's how I watched it.
Thanks.
Anyway, moving on from Tom Hanks to Leo. His acting arc is interesting as well. He was 5 years from Titanic. This came out the same year as Gangs of New York, 2 years after The Beach, which are the main ones. And he said that he was, I don't know if he said this or it just became clear, that he obviously wanted to do more grown-up movies, because Titanic isn't a kid's movie, but it is still a very, teen heartthrob type of thing. The Beach, very much that as well. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I like The Beach.
I'd heard terrible things about it at the time, and then I watched it a few years ago. I was like, yeah, it's decent. But yeah, he's obviously making Gangs of New York in this, one after the other. So he's making a very clear decision to be a grown-up. And yeah, this is a beginning of a great run for him. After this, he does The Aviator. 2 years later, The Departed, and then he just makes like a whole bunch of great movies. But again, I think Tom Hanks fits the role very well, but Leo is almost perfect for this. So, and it's super interesting that he had this whole growing up transition, because this movie is about growing up. And both from the character development, from the fact that it's a great transition from him to go from a boy to a man, because he does in the movie, but also the fact that he's playing a 16-year-old at the beginning, credibly, because he still looks really young there, especially with the hair. And then obviously he's 28 when the movie comes out. So the idea that he was in his... Because at the end of... Even... trying to do the math. Even when he's on Tell the Truth show, I don't know how old the real Frank Abagnale was. But maybe he was in his 30s. But so still... And it's funny how they make his hair like, this is what a 30-year-old hair looks like. Just like shit. When he's working for the FBI and stuff. But yeah, he's the exact same height as Frank Abagnale says that he is in the book, 6 foot. So boyish, look older. And obviously the most important thing here, and we'll talk about in the recasting, is like the credibility and the charm of a con man. The idea that he would just swoon people, and obviously with him you believe in. And sometimes in these movies you just think, no, who would believe that?
No, I really like him in the film. I think he just kind of works for that role, and I think, like you said, because it's, I won't call it a coming of age film as such, but because it's a film about this guy dealing with this tough transition period in his like late teen years. He's almost kind of accelerating his age in terms of all the cons that he does. But I think Leonardo, from a visual point of view, obviously he looks like in his late 20s at certain points of the film, but he looks like a 16-year-old at certain points of the film as well. And I don't think any of that's like any magic CGI trickery or anything. It's purely just
hair and maybe a bit of makeup.
That's it, yeah. So testament to obviously those departments, but also testament to him as well for playing that role, like the youngish, but also having that confidence of someone who's a little bit older as well. I think he just plays it really well. You
touched on something interesting that we haven't talked about. We've talked a lot about the different arcs of different characters, but with him there's this, we talked about him trying to keep the family together, but one of the themes in this is the effect of divorce. And the Frank Abagnale, the real guy, has said numerous times, like one of his things is about people don't understand the trauma of divorce and stuff. And so in real life, I take issue with that, because there's plenty of people who, the child of I think a lot of times the people divorce for good reason and it's better. And then also a lot of people, millions and millions of people have been the child of divorce and have not become criminals for defrauding people for millions. So in real life, I take issue with the idea that that's the lesson that you should take away from this, that kids need to be kids. But from a movie point of view and from motivation of a character, it is very interesting that is like the thing that drives him for most of the movie. And again, I'm not going to talk about the real thing. In the book, the thing that drives him is sex. Like he is all he cares about is banging chicks. Like it's he says, I mean, the reason he starts writing bad checks in the book is because he wants to go on dates. And then the reason he does everything he does is to get girls. This is written black on white. In the movie, he basically stumbles into the womanizing thing when he just, he does the thing to the... He's obviously interested in girls. He like flirts with the girl at the school and stuff. But he has a very normal transition and seems to have a normal view of women and stuff. Like it's, what the average person would do in the situation. Whereas in the book, it's very much like that's the driving factor. There's never anything in the book about the fact that, like, again, he never saw he never saw his dad again, according to the book. And obviously, this is the sort of thing that you can see someone reading and be like, this is very interesting, but we need to give him a different motivation because it's not going to play as well. The movie wouldn't be nearly as good if his driving factor was he wants to bang as many girls as possible. So instead, they gave him this whole story on the family thing, which I think is a great motivation, especially because you forget. You can watch this movie for the 10 times and be halfway through and you forget, no, he's still 19 years old at this point.
Definitely.
And then the ending is very emotional with the coming to the... Obviously, that's all fake. But the escaping the mum and seeing that she's like moved on to have the other kid. That's years later, because the kid is like 3 or 4, which I guess just about adds up.
Yeah, and he's been in prison.
For a couple of years.
For a few years, you think, at this point,
Here's a interesting fact. Apparently, Leonardo DiCaprio had the flu for most of the filming of this. He claims he had the flu for most of it. He said for 2 months. The shoot was 52 days. So he was ill for most of this, which I mean, I don't know how you are when you have the flu, but
No.
I could not act in a movie, let alone give that
No,
performance.
demanding long days, you can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, and he said he could never really recover from it because he was working so much.
Right.
Maybe that's why he's so convincing when he's like coughing and stuff. Like, oh, great, give him an Oscar for that.
Yeah, that wasn't supposed to be in the film.
They were like, no, I think we should like
Just
it's
film,
really milk it. So now let's do the recasting. I think we've discussed in good detail what you need from both characters. So
Yeah.
traits I have for Leo are you need to have a certain height. And actually, we didn't say this. Well, we implied it with Leo, but one of the very important things in the book and the movie is the idea that someone at that age could pass for someone 10 years older.
Mm-hmm.
And we said Leo could. I was a bit skeptical about this in the book. And I actually went back and I found pictures of myself when I was 16 or 17. Maybe I'll choose to show a picture in the video of this. Maybe not. When were you your full height? So for context, I'm 6'6". You are
6'3".
So we're both very tall people. When were you 16? How tall were you?
I'd say by 16, 17. I was probably
so
my
I was my
height,
full height as well. Do you think at 16, 17 you could have passed for late 20s?
Late 20s, I don't think so. Mid, maybe?
So
Yeah,
I
I'd
first
say-
my thought was going to be no. My point was going to be look at me, I'm 6, and then I looked at it and I had a bit of acne, which it was clearing up at the time, but I had
Yeah.
that. But I thought if it wasn't for that, if I was dressed right, done your hair right, I was like, actually, yeah,
Yeah.
height does go a long way.
For sure. I think I started shaving when I was about 12 as well,
Oh,
so I
wow.
probably had
Yeah.
that to my advantage.
Yeah, I didn't have a beard at that age, but yeah. So you know what? I'm skeptical about a lot of things, but I do think that does kind of track. The point
Yeah.
for the recasting is you can't be choosing Timothy Chalamet. That's not who.
That was one of mine.
Okay. Well.
I have two, though.
Okay. So, but also to be boyish, Timothy Chalamet can do that. Charming, good actor. I put this other thing, not violence, because this is again. I realized it's during the not. Some would come up and I'd be like, no, this person would actually be scary as a con man to watch. Whereas you need to never feel like he's actually going to hurt anyone physically.
Right.
So, without further ado, then who did you consider and who have you picked?
So Timothy Chalamet, but we'll shove him to the side. Tom Holland, I've gone for. I think from an age point of view, I think he can play someone probably in their late 20s quite comfortably, but equally he passes a teenager in the Spider-Man films pretty well.
I mean, I definitely agree that he can be young, but the height. I mean, I put him in the same category as Timothy Chalamet. That I think they would be hard. Like he's probably in his late 20s now.
Is Timothy Chalamet small as well?
Yeah, they're both
okay.
short, but both of them I think now are around 30, but they
Yeah,
still both
probably,
look
yeah.
extremely young. So okay, so that's your choice. So that's who you've
I'm
chosen.
going with, yeah.
Okay, so people I considered Paul Mescal is in Gladiator, but I don't think he's not boyish enough. I considered Will Poulter. I considered
Yeah, I can see that.
Darren Barnett. He's from Never Have I Ever. Have you watched that?
No, I don't know who that is.
I considered Mason Gooding, Cuba Gooding Jr.'s son. One thing I realized, this character, if this was a straight remake in the time, this character has to be white, because if he's black, he will not get
Yeah.
any of those
In
places.
the time
Anyway,
period.
the person I settled on is Jacob Elordi. So from Saltburn, Euphoria, Priscilla. He's in his late 20s. He's tall. He's actually 6'3", but he still has boyish looks. So I think he could do both. He's a very good actor. Okay, now the Tom Hanks character. So traits: smart, likable, but also other people don't like him. He's kind of got that, fuck off attitude. I put competent but goofy, and again, not violent. You never want to feel like he's gonna kill Frank. Who did you consider and who did you go for?
Okay, so I've picked Leonardo DiCaprio to play Carl Hanratty, just because I think he can play that sort of a detective-y sort of role quite well. I think we've seen him in a few films play that sort of role. But equally, I think you kind of summed it up there. He can be both likable and dislikable.
Okay, but I hear you, and I did not consider him. He came up in my research that he's the right age now, but to me, he doesn't have the goofiness. Like, I think it would be the scene where he meets for the first time when he's been fooled, and he like, because he acts all tough, Tom Hanks' character, and then when he leaves the room, he's like, and you can tell that he's like not used to this sort of thing. To me, there's that fragility that I think Leo is too cool, if anything, to play.
I'd say the role that came to mind was Shutter Island, actually, in a way where he is quite like, you see him going through two extremes.
When you started that sentence, I thought you were going to say "Don't Look Up," because in "Don't Look Up," he's much more actually goofy.
Yeah.
Shutter Island.
Not necessarily goofy, but sorry, more like you see him
Fragile.
be quite fragile and flustered and things like that. But goofy, yes. Don't Look Up is a good example, actually. Yeah, it's probably one of his only films I can think of where he is a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's the only one.
Bit zanier, yeah. I did have a second choice, and it is going to sound like I only watch Marvel movies. But Robert Downey Jr. As Carl Hanratty, because he's probably someone that you can you sympathize with, but also they can be a bit of an arsehole.
Yeah, I can definitely see the arsehole bit. It's again, is he too cool to be? Because Tom Hanks has that. Just again, fragility has got to be the word.
Yeah.
But you know what? You make your own choices. So which one are you going with?
I'll go Leo.
Leo.
As a weird tie.
It's funny because when we did Mask of Zorro, I don't know if you got to that bit. Older Zorro character Antonio Banderas is just about the right age, so Frosty chose Antonio Banderas to be older Zorro.
Pure coincidence. What are yours?
I have a lot. I'll just rattle off some that I considered. I actually have two. I actually haven't made a final decision. Okay, this is cheating. I'm going to rattle off my consideration, then I'm going to tell you my two finalists, and I'm just curious to see what you think.
Okay.
That? So, not chosen. Sterling K. Brown. This is actually a very close. Steve Carell, I think, would have been great.
Great shout, yeah.
Adam Brody. So, have you seen him? He's in that rom-com at the moment with Netflix. So
Miriam's watched it. I've not seen it, but yeah.
Chris O'Dowd.
Yeah,
I think he'd be really good in this. Like, he's a good actor, but he's obviously maybe he's a bit too silly, but I think he could do it. Omar Sy, the French, you know him.
Yeah.
Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yes. Oh, that one. I like that one.
Pedro Pascal, Jason Sudeikis. So my two finalists are Jordan Peele.
Okay.
And Jason Segel.
That's tough. Jordan Peele absolutely could.
That was the one I was leaning for.
Think,
so we'll just go with that.
Yeah.
I think maybe Jason Segel, like he'd be the fragile thing. Maybe he's too tall. Okay, we're going Jordan Peele.
I'm going, yeah.
So my two are Jacob Elordi and Jordan Peele. Your two are Tom Holland and Leo. Mm-hmm. So I asked ChatGPT who they would pick. I specifically said, so I have to make a confession. I have two ways of doing this. I go through this website literally by age over like a 10-year period, and I just look at everyone and I'm like, okay, who's good? The other way I've started doing it is asking ChatGPT who are actors who would fit the mold. And Jacob Elordi came. I think I probably would have gotten there myself, but he came up there, and I was like, I think the first time I asked ChatGPT, narrow it down to one for each. They chose Jacob Elordi. I was like, shit. They chose Oscar Isaac for Carl, which I disagree with. I think he's way too serious. And again, not goofy at all. So because I chose Jacob Elordi, I decided to ask ChatGPT to make another definitive choice. And it shows Tom Holland and Bryan Cranston for the Carl role.
I like those.
And I also asked, please give me a one-sentence explanation. For Tom Holland, his youthful charm and quick wit would capture the cleverness and vulnerability of a con artist. And for Bryan Cranston, his blend of stern authority and dry humor would make him a perfect fit for the relentless yet empathetic FBI agent.
Wow, chat. I don't use it clearly enough. That's some detailed reasoning as well.
So we're going to move on to production, which, by the way, is sponsored by Concave Brand Tracking. If you have any interest in finding out data on brands and movies, contact us at info@concavebt.com. What are some brands that you noticed in Catch Me If You Can?
Oh man, now you're testing me. Pan Am.
Pan Am is the big one. Unsurprisingly, between the mentions and everything, Pan Am is one of the biggest ones. There's also some Ray-Ban sunglasses. Cadillac gets mentioned a lot as like the status symbol. So with older movies like that, it's always fun how they use brands to kind of show stuff. But yeah, people like us who Pan Am was defunct by the time we were born, I'm pretty sure this is what we will ever associate with Pan Am is this 100%. Movie. But yeah, moving on to first thing, as we said, nominated Oscar, the music. John Williams' 20th movie with Steven Spielberg. At this point, God knows how much it is now.
Yeah, I just think like I said towards the beginning, and I think I mentioned a couple of times, the playfulness, I think, and you kind of summed it up nicely where the opening titles kind of summarize all the tones of the films, and I think the music is what achieves that, and you kind of notice when certain things are happening, when it's the sadder scenes, when it's the scenes about the family, how the tone kind of drops, and it is a little bit more kind of heart-wrenching, a little bit if you connect with the film on that emotional level, and then when it's the scenes of him just kind of discovering things or learning how to do X, Y, and Z for the first time, or obviously doing the cons. It's a little bit more playful, and I think that allows you to buy into it a lot more, into the story and into the character, and it not being like, oh, this guy's doing some bad stuff. It's more like, oh no, this is quite fun. This is quite fun to watch someone that isn't necessarily doing good things, but I'm enjoying watching the process. I'm enjoying watching their skill.
I love how many times you've basically said something that's perfectly set up something I have in my notes. So one of the terms John Williams used was playfully whimsical, which I think is pretty much exactly what you just said. Like light-hearted, let's not focus too much on it. From a technical point of view, I had not really thought about what genre of music it is, but it's very jazzy, lots of sax. Apparently John Williams, I mean, he probably can do every type of music, but he used to have a background in jazz. He was very happy to come back to do that. He talks about how obviously the different themes and the happy Christmassy one with around Frank, then you have the FBA closing in, the tension. So yeah, it's beautiful score. I've been very neck deep in this movie for the last 2 weeks. I literally sometimes when I can't sleep, I can hear the tune in my head. So yeah, that's always a sign that it's a good one. The costumes, apparently the costume designer said in an interview that while they were shooting this, they pretty much used up every 60s outfit in LA. Like they just were calling everyone. I was like, we need everything. One of these things I didn't think about until I was researching it. Apparently Leo's character has over 100 wardrobe changes.
Wow.
So, and obviously, the costumes are really good. They talk a lot in the behind the scenes about the frenetic pace of making this and how it's true. Again, you don't necessarily think about it, but apart from a couple of big dialogue scenes, it's really like as we talk about the pace, it moves really quickly. And apparently they filmed it in 52 days where literally they would be like half a day here, they'd be going somewhere else, going onto a set, doing this scene, doing the Jennifer Garner scene. Okay, we need to do, like, they were filming really quickly everywhere, and they did it. And I think everyone involved, who were obviously very experienced actors, said it was one of the fast-paced shoots they've ever had, to the point that you can kind of feel it in the movie. It feels like you're moving along. But it's one of the things that makes this movie so watchable, is that you're never like there's never a time where you go 3 minutes going, oh, I'm bored. Because even if there's a scene you don't like, and one that you like is like coming up.
Definitely, and I think even the scenes that are maybe, I won't call them filler, but then maybe not as important to the story, they don't enhance the plot, they don't enhance the characters so much, they don't linger on them for too long. So you never like, what is this about?
Another thing which I noticed, but then they talked about it, it's always nice when you notice something technical and then you hear, it's like, yeah, I was right about that, was the use of color. How it's always really dark when it's on Carl, and then it's quite light on Frank. And they said apparently, actually it was even with the costumes, they said it started very monochromatic at the beginning when he's a kid, and then they said as he gets better at doing his job, the colors and the fashion got wilder. So that the epitome of that was in the Georgia scene where there's the party and they're all waving this crazy like 60s out there fashion. They showed Spielberg, and the costume designer's like, how did anyone ever wear this at the time?
That's a good thing to pick up on next time I watch it.
And then they use light a lot. Like I said, in the scene where he's down on his luck and he sees the pilot, and suddenly, there's this just light coming down on him. And then, when things are going well, his light. The Christmas scenes, the Christmas calls are usually quite dark because things are dark there. And then at the end, everything in France and prison is really, really dark. So just beautifully crafted movie.
Definitely, and I think the last thing that I really pick up on with the production is the editing. And I know you mentioned at the beginning, maybe you're not the biggest fan of the non-linear kind of format, and maybe the way certain scenes are trimmed and cut and what's put where. But for me, I think that's one of the strengths of the film, in my opinion.
I guess I haven't put too much thought, and if I haven't done it for this podcast, I never will, in terms of what would be the other way of doing it. Like, how would this story, maybe one day over drinks, you and I can go through, okay, if they did this in a linear way, what would be the the flaws and stuff. But no, I put it this way, I haven't figured out, I'm not like, oh, they should have done it this way. So if it's a great movie, so I wouldn't mess with it. But I'm not sometimes I think I know exactly why they did that. In this case, I'm not totally convinced, but I won't argue with the result. Just wrapping up the production, I like to ask people, what's one image or one object or one color, one sound? You can answer all or a couple. Like, what are very basic elements that this movie, when you think of this movie, you think of them, or when you see these objects, you think of them?
I think blue for color, definitely. I think
Pan Am blue.
Pan Am,
and the suit.
Titles, and I think even those darker color graded scenes that you mentioned earlier, they do look a little bit like a blue tinge, blue tone to them. For sound, to go back to the music and talk about the saxophone, I think that's something that kind of pops out to me as like quite striking. And like you said, when you were you've been watching it, reviewing it so much that it just kind of sticks in your brain. And then for like image that encapsulates the film, for me, it's the opening title. Like you take any screenshot from it, I think it kind of encapsulates the film quite nicely, and it being quite a simple story. But
almost when we saying that, we like almost like a kid's book, which again ties into everything.
But there's a lot to it when you kind of look a little bit further, and then it kind of tells you everything in one go as well.
For me, for the sound would be like I thought of maybe the typewriter or the presses, but actually it's the paper, the paper flying and stuff. And then it would be for an object, it would be the Pan Am check. So I think we talked at length about the structure of the script and the story, but what specific lines beyond the milk? Do you have any?
Well, milk is number one.
Okay.
I think, like I mentioned earlier, the scene that Tom Hanks says about, it kind of summarizes the film about, it's a lot often easier to live the lie. I think that just kind of summarizes the film quite nicely, and also unveils a lot more about his character as well, in terms of why he necessarily didn't open up to, he has many reasons not to open up to someone that he's chasing for being a criminal, but the fact that he doesn't open up so much to the film, to the audience, to other characters, it's kind of the fact that he's quite closed off and so fixated on his job. So I think that reveals a lot about him, but also kind of reveals a lot about the whole story.
Absolutely. I've mentioned already quite a few of these, but the first one, again with Tom Hanks, is I've worked too hard for too long. If he dies, I'm holding you responsible. So I think that line doesn't actually make a lot of sense by the end, because you think he actually does care about him. But it's a good way of introducing him, and he shows that, I mean, he is very career driven, and it's like, no, this is my prize. Mm-hmm. Then I've got the 2 mice speech. So if you haven't watched this in a while, I probably should have said this a lot earlier, but the 2 mice speech is this idea of 2 mice were in a cup of milk. One mouse gives up and drowns, and the other mouse keeps fighting and eventually turns the milk into butter and is able to climb out of the cup. So it's this super inspirational thing that Frank Sr. says when he's first introduced at the Rotary Club introduction, but then is kind of used, as we said, as this kind of callback line of, actually it's just kind of a bullshit thing to say to kind of explain certain things. And then he uses, I think that's it, when Lee offers him the Cadillac, he doesn't even say the speech, he goes, 2 mice. Yeah. I'm the mice that came out. Sort of he's trying to tell himself that he's the mouse to go out, but he's actually the mouse who drowned. And then Leo uses it to say grace as the con. The thing I link that one to, the 2 mice speech, is just a con man's way of getting out of stuff, is the whole Yankees and the pinstripe thing. You know why the Yankees always win, Frank? It's because the other teams can't stop staring at those damn pinstripes. And again, it's a great line at first, but then it's funny that by saying that, it's kind of a giveaway for Frank Jr., because he says that to Carl, and that's how he knows that he's from New York. Right. So it betrayed him. But also, it's not true. Like, again, it sounds great, but the fact is, the reason why the Yankees win is because they have good players, which is what everyone else says. Why are they good? It's like, because they've got those good players. Like, no, it's because of that. It's like, okay, again, it sounds good, but it doesn't actually make sense. No. And I think, again, that is, I think it's an interesting line to turn on itself to explain the movie. It's basically like someone who says, I want to be good at baseball, so I'm just going to have a nice looking uniform. And like, people might look at you, but you're never going to be considered a good baseball player if that's your mantra at life. Then again, super basic, but hey, you want me to tell you a joke? Knock, knock. Who's there? Go fuck yourself. And then there's a callback to that later on where I think one of his bosses is giving him a bad time. And he just says, hey, you want to hear a joke? Yeah. And I think they just cut away. And sometimes it's just great to have the implicit scene and not even have it. Yeah. Then it's the smallest line, but it's the one I use in everyday life. I think of the lot is, do you concur? Because
I don't know how I didn't even register that one.
It's not a super fancy word that you would never use, but it's also not something that you would use normally. But it is something that applies to everyday life. So like I'll say to Sunita, I was like, so I think that we should like maybe go the slightly longer way, but we'll avoid the hard traffic. And I'll go, do you concur? And anyone who's seen the movie knows what you're referring to. So I love that line. I think every time I hear the word concur, I think of that movie.
Absolutely, that's in there as one of the top quotes from any film, but this film especially. I would say as well, it's a funny line by itself, but I think it also
they build it well.
Yeah, they build it well, and I think it kind of demonstrates how willing people are to listen to authority or perceived authority. Like obviously in that role, in that moment, Frank's character is playing like the senior doctor who's overseeing all the interns, all the resident doctors, all the nurses. So you kind of just take whatever they say, and you're just like, well, this is the authority figure, this is the person in charge, so whatever they say, however they do things, is the correct way to do it. So I think, it's a funny line, but it also kind of says a lot about the situation.
Yeah, I actually also love as a follow-up when he asks, one of them says something, and he says it, and he says to one, do you concur? And he sort of waffles, and then he said to the third one, do you concur? And he says, I concur. Yeah. And then as he walks away, the second guy goes, why didn't I concur? It's just, I think that's it. It's a funny word. It's the repetition, and obviously it's the fact that we know he's got it from the TV show. So yeah, it's a great multi-layered. Then another one I'm really fond of is when he tells everything to Amy Adams, like everything. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a Lutheran. I'm not this or that. And she goes, "You're not a Lutheran?" Like that again, perfectly played, and just shows that she's like such a simple gal.
That's the thing that bothers her the most.
Yeah, and then the court scene, what the hell is wrong with you after he slams it. So, in summary of all the lovely things that we've talked about, where does movie rank in your top 100 and why?
So right now, asking me today, I put it pretty high. I'd say number 4.
Wow.
Pretty high up, yeah.
Okay.
You're not expecting that?
Well, no, I wasn't. I mean, I'm not entirely surprised because everything we said that you chose it. But the point is, this was meant to be like one of the ones that... This was meant to be the way I do it with my guests is so one for you, one for me. You choose a film, I choose a film. But you're a lot higher than...
Sounds like it's one of mine.
Yeah, it turns out. You're just winning. So give us your reasons.
Yeah, reasons are, I think it's just probably one of the best paced films. And I take note of pacing a lot. Not intentionally, but I think whenever I've watched a film, I'm like, that was paced really well. Or when I notice something isn't paced particularly well, I'm like, that felt rushed at the start. Or there wasn't enough setup for that. Or that felt it lingered too long. Whereas there's nothing in the film where I even question a single scene or a moment. There's one, actually. The one that you mentioned.
Which one?
When he says the knock knock joke again.
Oh, really?
So he goes, do you want to hear a joke? And then it cuts back to his boss and he says, what's the joke? And then it cuts back to Carl and he says, knock knock. I actually think they should have cut it where he says, do you want to hear a joke?
Oh yeah, I thought he had said that. That's why.
But that's honestly the smallest.
If that's the only one, yeah.
But no. Just to be serious, the actual summary of the film, I think it's just phenomenally paced, edited, performed. It's a really interesting story, and like I said, I think even on the 3 levels I kind of mentioned at the beginning, whether you take it at face value and you believe everything that you see and hear in the film, you can enjoy it and you're just like, wow, this is a really interesting story, I can't believe this happened. You could take it a little bit less at face value and be like, oh, okay, they've taken a few liberties, it's a film, but for the most part it's been stitched together and the story still happened, it's still really interesting, it's well put together. And the third thing is just you don't believe any of what you've just seen or heard, and you can just appreciate it for an amazingly made film. And then also the meta element that I think you mentioned earlier about the film has kind of almost conned you into thinking that all these things actually happened, and that kind of works perfectly for this person, this man, this con artist, if you like. The film's about has maybe also conned you to begin with as a person watching the film as the audience member. So I think the film just works on multiple levels, and I think you can watch it if you want something that's actually you want to think about a little bit more. Obviously we've talked about it extensively here, but also you can just kind of put it on and just sit and enjoy and watch it as well. So I think it just works on multiple levels because it has multiple layers.
God, I have not got much to add to that. You've hit all the points, but so for me it's at number 35. But
my favorite number.
All the reasons you said. Just a well-crafted movie, entertaining, great actors, interesting. Yeah, entertaining, I think, because obviously all the movies that we cover here are meant to be entertaining, but sometimes the entertaining is like, it's got entertaining bits, but it's super interesting, or it's like really funny. I mean, funny is usually entertaining, but this one, it hits a lot of different notes. As you're saying, the pacing is great, the acting's great. Even though I have some negative thoughts, and I ranked this before I did my deep research, so I don't know if what I now know about the movie is going to drop it at all, but the fact that it made me want to do so much research into this character, into this story, maybe the movie is actually only one element of the Catch Me If You Can universe, if you will, but that's even if you uncover some things that aren't particularly nice, which I did, the fact that something can drive your curiosity so much, something that can drive so much passion, that in itself has got to be something huge. So for that reason, I commend it.
Definitely, yeah. I think anything that opens a conversation or makes you think, oh, I want to know more about that situation, I think there's got to be some praise there.
And this brings me very neatly to a transition question to the final segment we're going to do. about this? And how important is it for this movie to work that it's based on a true story? So I guess multifaceted. If they had never said this is based on a true story, do you think it would still work?
That's a great question. I don't think there'd be as much intrigue around it. I think definitely probably wouldn't have done as well either. I think when I was younger watching it, I think I was just like, oh, this is, a biographical film. This is super interesting because this happened. I can't believe someone actually did this. I think that was my main attachment to it when I was younger. I didn't have the appreciation of the production elements like we've talked about and everything like that, and the filmmaking qualities of it. So I think, yeah, even I can speak personally, I think that probably is the same case for a lot of people. But watching it as a fully grown adult, I think I don't necessarily need it to be true to enjoy it.
But if you were watching it for the first time as an adult and it wasn't true, you think it wouldn't be as enjoyable?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it is important. And I've thought this about other movies, and I'll give you a very specific example. Both ways, like The Wolf of Wall Street, if that was just a made-up movie about a guy doing this, you kind of be like, what's the point of this?
Right,
and the point of telling the true story. I did actually, after debunking a lot of this, I did then do a quick dig and be like, please tell me The Wolf of Wall Street isn't all lies. And it does seem like that's much more, some bits were... The difference between real life and the movie is much more what you would expect in this. So the movie Fury, it's a tank movie, World War II movie with Brad Pitt, John Bernthal, Shia LaBeouf. It's just a great action war movie. And they're this tank crew. And for most of it, it's just a great high-quality war movie about character development and stuff and living in World War II during the invasion. And then at the end, there's this scene, guys, spoiler, skip ahead 40 seconds if you don't want to know, where this one tank takes out like 3 or 4 German tanks in a heroic way and they kill them and it's sort of like super important. And I watched it and I was like, this is cool, but is this true? And it wasn't. It was completely fictional. And maybe it's because it was taking place within World War II, which is a very real thing. But I was like, that's a bit weird. It's a bit weird to make a movie about this thing that didn't happen in a very real thing. And because maybe it's this. Because this connects to so many real things, like the FBI, fraud, Pan Am, which is a real business, it feels very connected. So to me, it has to be true. And I think... which I think is what we're getting at. If we were to watch it as grown-ups knowing that it wasn't true, you would just spend the whole movie going, well, that's ridiculous. That wouldn't happen. That wouldn't happen. Mm-hmm. But you get the inspired by a true story. And even if you know that certain bits have been exaggerated, you say, well, he must have done something like that. Mm. And again, Wolf of Wall Street, that's it. You see these things like, this is ridiculous. But it's based on a true story. And that's basically what happens here. Now we're there. It is 95% lies. Mm-hmm. Like, on so many levels. I've read this book. I've started reading this book. I have something to offer the audience if they kind of want to start digging, but you don't want to go straight into the 400-page book. There's a biographics video. I'm a big fan of the channel. I sent this to you. Yeah. The main source for that is the book. So if you've watched the movie and you want to dig a little deeper, if you want to basically know the story of the book, which is slightly different from the movie, watch the biographics video. I'll put a link in the description. That's 20 minutes. It basically summarizes the book perfectly. And then you'll see the nuances between the book and the movie. You've experienced that. If you then want to go deeper, read the book. Read the Catch Me If You Can book. You'll know the story, but you'll get the extra details. And then if you want to go a bit deeper than that, there's a 7-8 part podcast that I've just blasted through in the last couple of days called Pretend, where the guy basically does a deep dive. The main thing he's doing is he's using this book as a source, but he double-checked a lot of things. Like, we're talking about getting government documentation about prison sentences, about checking with schools, whether he's been to places and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So that, I've listened to it quickly. It's a podcast. And if you enjoyed that, read this book, The Greatest Hoax on Earth, Catching the Truth While We Can. Sorry. There's another level. If you read the Wikipedia article on Frank Abagnale Jr., that is mostly sourced off this book, so you can read that in 10-15 minutes. You should probably do that. It's the next easy one. So Wikipedia article, podcast, book. So I'm now not going to do a deep dive 1 hour on that. Instead, I'm going to give Bharat a list of bullet points of things from the movie, and you're going to pick 3 or 4, and I'm going to briefly tell you basically how the movie compared to the book compared to real life. And then for our listeners, make sure to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. I'm going to do an extra bonus audio-only episode where I'm going to do every single one of these in a bit more depth. So if you want to hear more on this next segment, make sure to subscribe on the podcast platforms. So, Bharat, here is a dozen bullet points. Pick at least 3 or 4, but don't limit yourself either. I'll put them
Let's start with work with the FBI.
So this is one of the big ones. According to the movie, he works with the FBI while he's in prison. Then he gets special parole, and then works with the FBI pretty much full time. They didn't acknowledge that he starts his own company, but the idea is that he's always collaborated. There is some truth to this, so we're not going to give this one a pants on fire lie. He is claimed. This is another thing, another dimension to it, is what Frank Abagnale has said in all of his speaking engagements. Because the number one thing this guy is a speaker. He has made millions of dollars. He gets paid 20, 30 grand per appearance to go around. For years, he did it talking about his story. But then when they started getting a bit debunked, he's now just a fraud expert. So he kind of sells himself as being the catch me if you can guy. But then he comes and he just talks for an hour about cybersecurity and stuff like that.
Right.
The crux of it is, it does seem like he has lectured at the FBI. He's been brought in as an outsider to do seminars on cybersecurity or whatever. His son is actually a real FBI agent, and he said in an interview, "Oh yeah, my dad came in and lectured." So it does seem like he has worked with them a little bit. He definitely he never had an office in the FBI. He was never on the payroll of the FBI. He has claimed that he was an FBI agent. He's claimed that he went undercover for the FBI in secret military bases. None of that is true. So he has an affiliation with the FBI. Very annoyingly, the FBI has refused to basically make official. So they've sort of said, yes, he has had an affiliation with the FBI, but then they won't come forward and say he's never been an agent, he's never been on the payroll.
Right.
But he is not an FBI agent.
Mm-hmm. All right, next one, a romantic.
Okay, this is actually one of the worst ones. So in the movie, it's made out like he falls in love with the Amy Adams character, and he has feelings like he's not in love with the woman he loses virginity to, but there is just an emotional side to him. And it seems like he has a heart. He did love the Amy Adams character. He would have loved to settle down. As I said earlier, this guy was just addicted. He actually, based on some of the people on the podcast, he was a sex addict. It seems like even after this, later on when he was on tour talking about this, he would hook up with multiple women in a night. So he's a full-fledged sex addict. And you read the book, all he's talking about is hooking up with women. And there's one the one that Brenda is based on, who was a virgin when he met her, said that she wasn't going to get married until... she said that she wasn't going to have sex until she got married, took her virginity, en route to meet her parents, met her parents. She basically thought that because they'd had sex, they were going to get married. They started making wedding arrangements, and he basically bailed on her, not because he was being chased by the police, but because he was getting too involved.
Right.
He claims in the book, again, this is all in the book, so it's a huge grains of salt, but this is his story. This is what he's claiming. So this is him in his best light. He takes his virginity from this girl, lets her believe they're going to get married, then takes her to a park, tells her the truth about him, but then freaks out, says, "I'll be back in an hour," leaves, never sees her again. So, and the way he talks about women in the book is pretty fucking disgusting. They're literally just conquest. It's like, oh, this broad here, this chick there, I slept with her, she was great. I actually was a bit skeptical about maybe he's just making it up and he's being a macho man. But based on the podcast, and they actually talked to a couple of women who had gone on dates with him, maybe he wasn't as successful as he said, but it does seem like he was very aggressive and flirting to the point of stalking some of these women. But he probably was sleeping with a bunch of women, but God knows how he was doing it. And then, based on later tales, he was a sex addict. So not at all romantic.
No, I thought it was going to be funnier than that.
No. Oh, none of these aren't particularly funny.
Escape artist.
Okay, another good one. So in the movie, they show him escaping through the plane. He then, in real life, said, actually, it wasn't through the plane, because loads of people said that's not possible. He said, I actually escaped through the kitchen or whatever. Didn't happen. That didn't happen at all. It's in the book. Mm-hmm. He claims that he escaped through the plane. But then he made out in his speech, because again, this guy has spoken so much. He said so much. I've literally heard different things. I'm like, well, that doesn't jive with that. He claims that he escaped from Atlanta's maximum security facility. He said that. He says it in the book. He says it in interviews and stuff. The podcast, the book, they researched it. He was never incarcerated at that prison. Only 2 people ever escaped it. They definitely weren't him. The only documented escape that he ever had was once, I think he had been arrested and he was in, so sort of in the waiting area of the office, and they were processing his paperwork, and he walked out.
Right.
That's the only documented time of escaping. But then he got caught again very quickly, and I think they added 2 years to his sentence for escaping. So he got out of custody once or twice, but not nearly in the fancy ways that he said.
Yeah, it did seem a little bit the plane.
Yeah.
Also, the scene that happens, he's still in the airport, but then it just cuts to him being at his mum's house.
Yeah, he in the book, he doesn't claim that he went straight to his mum's or whatever, but he definitely claims that he managed to get away.
Yeah. Let's go hooker. Yeah. Next one is, last one, hooker story, because that's one of my favourite scenes.
It is, I knew you were going to pick that one. So this one's interesting because apparently they weren't going to include it in the movie, and then Leo had read this in the book. It's pretty much word for word, beat for beat, the story you see, the scene that you see in the movie. Mm-hmm. And Leo said, we have to put this scene in because, I mean, it's a great scene. And if you take it verbatim, I mean, it's a great scene in the movie, so it's fun. So Leo insisted on doing it. They put it in, and he loves this story. He brought it up on Johnny Carson. I saw that bit.
Yeah,
but he's also, the way he tells it is a bit gross. Like one of the terms that he uses, hooking the hooker. And it's very disparaging of the woman in it, who he always justifies it as, I was being conned, so I conned her and stuff. And I was like, okay, I'm never going to find out whether this happened in real life or, I mean, I just assumed it wasn't true. It's actually worse than that. After he was on the show, before he wrote the book, he started doing these speaking tours. And his agent, who's one of the main sources for this book, would travel with him. And when he was asked in the podcast, this is where I heard it, he's being interviewed, about how this guy was a phony, and he gave us the example that they were at a convention with bankers or something, and some guy, not Frank Abagnale Jr., told, apparently it's a joke amongst bankers. I don't know exactly how the joke goes as a joke as opposed to a story, but the punchline is, I guess we both got screwed that night.
Right.
And the next day, he watched him use that joke as part of his seminar as it was a real story. So this guy saw in real time him hear this joke from someone else and then weave it into his myth. Then he put it in the book, and then it got into his book, and then it got used into the movie. But yeah, it's complete fiction.
Complete nonsense.
Well, Barda, that was one of our longest episodes, but you know what? A movie like this really deserves it. Just like this movie, I like to think that we were well-paced and there wasn't any filler. Hopefully, we both gave great performances.
I don't think you need to edit this.
Unfortunately, we haven't got John Williams to score it, but I'll do my best. Yeah. But yeah, thank you very much for coming on. Thank you for your insights, and happy that we talked about your 4th favorite movie of all time, and hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate you having me again, Dom. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode. If you've made it this far, I'd really appreciate it if you could follow us on whatever platform you're watching or listening to us for new episodes that drop on the last Thursday of every month, as well as great bonus content on YouTube and Instagram.